Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Fanfic Adventure, presenting to you today, what if Naruto was reborn as the Prince of Saiyans and used the Great Ape form to level the hidden cloud? Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Fell from the Sky. The pod hit the mountain like a fist. It didn't glide, didn't break, didn't do any of the things the Saiyan engineers had supposedly designed it to do in an emergency descent. It came in screaming, a white streak across a sky that had no business being this blue, this calm, this indifferent, and it punched through 300 feet of pine forest like the trees were made of paper before grinding to a stop in a ravine that the locals probably didn't even have a name for. The impact would have registered as an earthquake in the nearest village. Birds emptied out of the canopy for half a mile in every direction. Somewhere downstream, a river jumped its banks. Then silence. Then the hatch blew off. Kaido pulled himself out of the wreckage with one hand, his other arm pressed flat against his ribs where something had cracked on entry. He sat on top of the crumpled pod for a moment, bare feet dangling over the scorched metal, and looked at the sky he'd just fallen through. It was noon. The sun was directly overhead, harsh and white, and the air smelled like pine resin and something faintly electric, like the whole atmosphere was charged from his arrival. The trees around him were snapped at the trunk, some still falling in slow groaning arcs. A fire had started somewhere to his left, small and lazy, not enough to matter. He watched the sky for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, to no one at all, well. Could have been worse. His ribs knit themselves back together while he sat there. He felt it happening, the familiar crawl of Saiyan regeneration, like something inside him was reshuffling itself with brisk, businesslike efficiency. By the time he slid off the pod and landed in the churned earth, the pain was already fading to a memory. He was 12 years old. He had been 12 years old for exactly 4 months, by the calendar of a planet that no longer existed. He didn't think about that. He was very good at not thinking about things. What he thought about instead was food, water, and the fact that he could already sense, not see, not hear, but sense, the way Saiyans sense the pressure of other living things in the air around them, that there were people maybe 6 miles northeast. A cluster of warm, dense presences. A village, or a way station, or something in between. He reached back into the pod and pulled out the only things worth taking, a short curved blade that had been his father's ceremonial dagger, which he wore against his lower back, the scouter, cracked across the lens but still functional in one eye, and a piece of cloth that had been wrapped around his shoulders during the flight, which he fashioned into something approximating a shirt by the time he'd walked 20 feet. He looked back at the pod once. It had his father's crest on the side, a stylized flameman circle that meant nothing on this planet, that meant everything to the 18 people who had once sworn their lives to it, none of whom were alive anymore. Kaido looked at the crest for exactly 3 seconds. Then he turned and walked northeast. The forest was dense and old, the kind of growth that had been left alone for centuries. The trees were enormous, the undergrowth thick and tangled, and everything was wet with the particular damp that came from altitude and cloud cover. The land of lightning, he would learn later. For now it was just trees and gradient. He was moving downhill, which was good, and the air was getting thicker, which meant lower elevation, which meant people. He was, in a technical sense, lost. In a practical sense, he didn't particularly care. He had enough chakra, he still thought of it as chakra sometimes, an old habit from memories that belonged to someone who'd burned up years ago. He had enough ki to level the mountain range he'd just crash-landed on, and Saiyan survival instinct had been engineered by 10,000 years of being the galaxy's most dangerous predators. He was not especially worried about a forest. What he was, if he was honest, was tired. Not physically. Physically he felt fine, better than fine, the cracked ribs were already history and his body was running the way it always did, like a furnace someone had forgotten to put a limit on. The tired was something else. The kind that settled in behind the eyes and didn't move regardless of how much sleep you got. He'd lost his first world to a fox. He'd lost his second world to a lizard in armor. There was a dark comedy in there somewhere that would probably hit him in about 10 years. He was working through that particular thought when the arrow came out of the trees and stopped 3 inches from his face. Not stopped like it hit something. Stopped like whoever fired it had very precise control and had chosen, deliberately, to put it exactly there, a warning, a statement, a raised eyebrow in projectile form. Kaido crossed his eyes slightly to look at the arrowhead. Coated. Something dark and oily along the tip. Poison. He uncrossed his eyes and looked at the trees. There are 4 of you, he said. 1 directly ahead, 1 about 20 degrees left, 1 in the trees at 2 o'clock, and 1 behind me trying very hard to be quiet. He paused. That last one's doing a pretty good job, actually. A beat of silence. Then the 4 figures dropped from cover, 3 from the trees, 1 rising from the undergrowth behind him in an eruption of leaves that was genuinely impressive, tactically. They wore gray and silver, flak jackets over dark clothing, headbands with a symbol he didn't recognize yet. Cloud, though he didn't know the word yet. They were all adults, all wiry and capable looking, and all of them were staring at him with expressions that were trying very hard to be professionally neutral and mostly failing. Because he was a child. That was the part they were struggling with. He'd watched it happen with the patrol from the pod crash site too, that half-second recalibration when people saw the face and the age and tried to reconcile it with the readings their instincts were giving them, the hair standing up on the back of their necks, the low animal certainty that something in the dynamic was wrong. You'll want to put that down, the one directly ahead said. He was the leader, older than the others, face weathered, a scar cutting through one eyebrow. He was pointing at Kaido's waist, at the dagger. Hands where I can see them. I'm not reaching for it, Kaido said reasonably. I'm just standing here. Who are you? Where did you come from? I fell from the sky, Kaido said. The leader's eyes twitched slightly. That's not a real answer. I know. But it's accurate. Kaido tilted his head. What's this place called? The general area, I mean. The 4 of them exchanged a look, the rapid communication of a team that had worked together for years, conducted entirely in eyebrow movement and barely perceptible shifts in stance. The leader's hand moved, a signal, subtle enough that someone without Kaido's eyes would have missed it. Kaido sighed and moved. Not dramatically. Not with any particular flourish. He simply was standing in front of the leader, and then he was standing behind him, with the leader's wrist held loosely in one hand at an angle that communicated very precisely what would happen if that wrist continued moving toward the kunai it had been reaching for. The whole thing took approximately 0.3 seconds, and the other 3, who were good, he noted, they were genuinely quick, only had time to blur into defensive positions before Kaido was already done. He held the wrist gently. He wasn't squeezing. He didn't need to. I'm not looking for a fight, Kaido said, still in the same reasonable tone. I landed in your forest by accident. I'm looking for food and directions. I'd very much like to not hurt anyone today. He paused. That last part is me being sincere, not threatening. There's a difference and I want to be clear about which one it is. The leader was very still. He was processing, Kaido could feel it, the calculation running behind those steady gray eyes. How fast? How strong? What the gap was. He was a professional and professionals, when faced with data that contradicted their assumptions, didn't panic. They recalculated. Let go of my arm, the leader said, and we'll talk. Kaido let go and stepped back and held both hands out, open, relaxed. My name is Kaido, he said. I'm not from around here. I'm aware that's obvious. The leader turned slowly. He was rubbing his wrist, not because it hurt, Kaido genuinely hadn't squeezed, but with the unconscious motion of someone processing something through their hands. You're not a shinobi, he said. Not a question. No. What's a shinobi? That landed with a particular kind of weight. The 3 behind the leader glanced at each other again. The youngest of them, a woman, maybe 20, with her hair pulled back hard, was watching Kaido with an expression that was somewhere between alarm and fascination and was trying to be neither. "Where did you actually come from?" the leader asked. Kaido looked up at the sky, then back. "Genuinely? You wouldn't believe me. Try. I fell from space. My planet was destroyed. I was in an escape pod." He met the leader's eyes. "I know how that sounds." The silence that followed was the specific quality of silence that happened when a group of people simultaneously decided not to say what they were all thinking, which was clearly that this child had lost his mind. Except they'd all seen him move. So the silence had a complicated texture. "There was a crash," the young woman said suddenly. "We felt it. 20 minutes ago. Northeast, maybe, it registered like an earthquake." "That was my pod," Kaido said. "It's in a ravine. You're welcome to look at it, though I can't promise it tells you anything useful." The leader made a decision. Kaido could see the exact moment it happened, the line of his shoulders changing, the quality of his attention shifting from threat assessment to something more like information gathering. "Come with us," he said. "We'll take you to the village." "Which village?" "The nearest one." A pause. "After that, you'll likely be taken to the city." "And if I don't want to go to the city?" The leader looked at him steadily. "Then we'll have a problem." Kaido considered this. He looked at the forest around him, at the afternoon light coming through the canopy in long golden slats, at the four shinobi watching him with that particular brand of professional readiness that meant they were very good and had absolutely no idea what they were dealing with. "The city sounds fine," he said. "Is there food there?" The village was a small relay station, a cluster of maybe 30 buildings at the base of a ridge, the kind of place that existed to service travelers and patrols rather than as a destination in its own right. It had a food stall that sold skewers of grilled meat and a kind of flatbread that was dense and unleavened and tasted, to Kaido's particular palate, like cardboard wrapped around salt. He ate 9 of them while the patrol leader, who had given his name as Tetsuo, sent a messenger bird ahead and watched Kaido eat with the expression of a man revising several of his foundational assumptions about the world. "You're really not a shinobi," Tetsuo said, watching Kaido devour skewer number 7. "Already said that. No chakra. Nothing. It's just, you moved like that with no chakra." Kaido considered explaining. He looked at Tetsuo, who was a serious man doing a serious job and who had, Kaido suspected, a fairly robust framework for what was and wasn't possible. "I have something," Kaido said. "It's not chakra. It's different. I grew up using it." "What's it called?" "Ki," Kaido said. "Or you might call it something else. It doesn't matter what you call it. It's just energy. The same thing chakra is made of, I think, just organized differently." Tetsuo stared at him. "How old are you?" 12. Another long pause. "You have a lot of energy for 12. "Yeah," Kaido said, and bit into skewer number 8. "I get that a lot." The messenger bird came back an hour later while they were still sitting there. Tetsuo read the response, his expression doing something complicated, and then he folded the message and tucked it away and looked at Kaido with the particular neutrality that meant he was keeping something off his face. "The Reikage wants to see you," he said. "The who?" "The leader of the hidden cloud. Our village. Our city." He paused. "The most powerful shinobi in the land of lightning." Kaido nodded slowly. He had expected something like this. New place, unknown entity arrives, the person in charge wants to get eyes on them, it was basic governance. He understood it. He even respected it. "Okay," he said. "How far is the hidden cloud?" 2 days' travel on foot. Kaido looked at the mountains. He looked at Tetsuo. "Can you keep up if I move fast?" Tetsuo blinked. "What?" "I'll travel with you. But I move faster than a normal pace. I just want to know if that's going to be an issue." Tetsuo's eye twitched, very slightly, at the corner. "We'll manage," he said. They made it in a day and a half. The hidden cloud was built into a mountain. That was the first thing that struck Kaido, not how large it was, not how impressive the architecture, but the sheer audacity of the engineering decision. Someone had looked at a mountain and decided the correct thing to do was put a city on top of it, in the clouds, at an altitude where the wind cut and the temperature dropped 20 degrees from the valley floor. The buildings were heavy and squared, built from the dark stone of the mountain itself, and the whole place had the particular energy of somewhere that had decided, architecturally, that it did not need to be welcoming. He liked it, in a specific way. It was honest. This city knew what it was. They came in through a gate that required the patrol to present credentials, and then through a second checkpoint, and then through a series of streets that cleared out around Kaido in that particular way where people were pretending not to stop and stare while absolutely stopping and staring. Word had traveled ahead of him, the messenger bird, probably, or something faster, and the people watching from doorways and windows had that look of people who'd been told something was coming and were now trying to decide if the thing matched the description. He was wearing a patched-together outfit assembled from what he'd had in the pod plus a shirt that Tetsuo had procured from the relay station, which was a size and a half too large and kept falling off one shoulder. His black hair was doing what it always did, which was approximately nothing he wanted it to. He looked, objectively, like a 12-year-old who had recently fallen from space and not slept much since. The feeling coming off the crowd was cautious. Not hostile, not yet. But the kind of carefully maintained neutrality that could tip either way. He kept walking. The Richest tower was at the center of the city, the tallest building in the complex, and they didn't take him there. Instead they took him to a building adjacent to it, a meeting hall, he gathered, the kind of place used for things that weren't quite official and needed a degree of deniability. The room they put him in had a table and 4 chairs and a window that looked out over the city's eastern face, down to the valley far below, and they brought him a meal that was substantially better than the relay station flatbread and then left him alone. He sat at the window and ate and looked at the city. It was, he thought, about a tenth the size of the Saiyan royal city, which had been a thing of engineered brutality and dark metal and the particular aesthetic of a civilization that had spent several thousand years being very good at killing things. The hidden cloud had some of that energy, the angularity, the elevation, the implicit message embedded in every design choice that said we are not afraid of you, but it also had things the Saiyan city hadn't. Laundry lines. Children's chalk drawings on a courtyard wall. A food stall somewhere below where someone was cooking something with ginger and garlic that was making Kaido's nose work harder than he'd like. He had been sitting there for 40 minutes when the door opened and the Reikage came in. Was not what Kaido expected, which was interesting because he'd had a day and a half of travel to build an expectation. He'd been told most powerful shinobi in the land of lightning and had imagined someone older, more decorated, more given to the trappings of authority. What walked through the door was a man in his late 30s, physically enormous in the specific way of someone whose body had been built by decades of extreme physical training rather than size, with dark skin and hard eyes and the kind of posture that came from never having had a reason to hunch. He was wearing the hat and cloak of his office, but they sat on him like they were irritated to be there, like they'd have preferred he was in his fighting gear. He had 2 people with him, a younger man with silver white hair and a relaxed, almost sleepy expression that didn't match the alertness in his eyes, and behind him, hanging back with a very specific quality of attention, a woman who was perhaps 22, with long dark hair and eyes that were watching Kaido with something that wasn't quite wariness but was something adjacent to it. The Reikage sat across from Kaido. His 2 companions positioned themselves to either side, not threateningly, just present. "You're the thing that fell from the sky," A said. "My name's Kaido," Kaido said. "But yes." A's eyes moved over him with the rapid comprehensive assessment of someone who had spent his entire professional life reading threats. Kaido let it happen. He had nothing to hide and no particular reason to perform. "You're 12, A said. 4 months ago, yeah. My patrol reports you moved faster than they could track. Disarmed a Jonin in under a second." "He was reaching for a weapon," Kaido said. "I didn't hurt him." "No, A agreed. You didn't. He folded his hands on the table. They were enormous hands, Kaido noticed, the knuckles thick, the kind of hands that had hit things very hard for a very long time. That tells me something. What does it tell you? That you're either controlled or you're not interested. Either way, I want to know which. He looked at Kaido directly. Not aggressively, Kaido appreciated that. He was a blunt man, but he wasn't a theatrical one. Tell me what you are. Kaido leaned back in his chair. He had thought about how to handle this moment during the entire journey, in the spaces between the conversations with Tetsuo's team and the process of learning 100 words of context about where he'd landed. He'd run several versions of this conversation in his head, several different framings, several different levels of disclosure. He'd eventually decided that the complicated versions were all worse than the honest one. My people were called Saiyans, he said. We lived on a planet called Vegeta. For days ago, in my time, I don't know what that translates to here, the planet was destroyed by someone more powerful than us. Most of my people were off-world already, sent on assignment. But the royal family, he stopped for exactly one beat. We were on the planet. My father had recalled us for a ceremony. So when it happened fast. He looked at the table for a moment, then back up at I was in a pod. Emergency launch, automated. I don't know how I ended up here rather than somewhere else, the navigation was damaged in the debris field. But here is where I ended up. And I don't have anywhere else to be. Silence in the room. The white-haired man, Darui, Kaido would learn, was watching him with an expression that had shifted from relaxed to something more genuine. The woman hadn't moved. Was still looking at him with those hard, measured eyes. Your father was the king, said. Yes. Which makes you, the prince. Of a kingdom that doesn't exist anymore. So it doesn't make me much of anything. Kaido said it flatly, without performance. It was just the fact of it. I'm not asking for anything. I don't want to cause trouble. I just need to understand where I am and what's here. Was quiet for a long moment. And the power, he said. You're 12. You moved the way you moved. What is the ceiling? Kaido looked at him. I don't know, he said honestly. Saiyans get stronger every time they survive a serious fight. It's how we're built. The ceiling, he paused. There isn't one that I know of. Something shifted in A's expression. Just slightly. It was not fear, it was something more careful than fear, the look of a man encountering a piece of information that required significant reorganization of existing structures. Kaido had seen it before. He'd seen it on his father's generals' faces when the scouters came back with impossible readings from the outer systems. Darui, said. Yeah, Darui said, from behind him, in a voice that suggested he was thinking exactly what A was thinking. Get Yujito. The woman, not Yujito, then, moved immediately to the door. Kaido watched her go, then looked back at A. What's Yujito? He asked. Not a what? A who? A leaned forward slightly. Someone who will find you very interesting. He paused. And possibly vice versa. Yujito arrived 20 minutes later, and she came in the way people came into rooms when they'd been told something and hadn't quite believed it yet. She was taller than Kaido expected, lean and precise in her movements, wearing standard Jonin gear with her blonde hair tied back and eyes that were a very particular shade of teal that caught the afternoon light from the window and did something that light probably wasn't supposed to do. She was 20 years old and she looked at Kaido the way most people looked at complicated equations they were fairly sure were wrong but couldn't disprove yet. He's 12, she said, to A. You were told, A said. I know but, she looked at Kaido again. You're 12. 4 months ago, Kaido said, for the third time that day. He was starting to find it slightly funny. I've heard I look young for my age. She crossed her arms. What are you sensing from him? She asked A, which was an interesting question. She was talking about sensing, not reading, not observing, which suggested she had something beyond regular perception. Nothing readable, A said. Which is the problem? He's not a shinobi. He has no chakra signature. Nothing I can categorize. Yujito looked at Kaido with an expression that was reassessing something, some foundational expectation, and then she said, quietly, the way people said things they were still working out, I can feel something. It's not chakra. She stopped. Ki, Kaido supplied. She blinked. What? That's what it's called. Where I'm from. She was quiet for a moment, and then she pulled out a chair and sat down across from him, not at A's end of the table but at the other corner, angled toward him, and the quality of her attention shifted from professional evaluation to something more direct. Personal, almost. How much of it do you have? Kaido thought about how to answer that. He looked at the window, at the city spread below it, at the mountain range extending beyond in every direction. He thought about the last time someone had asked him to measure his own power and what the honest answer would look like expressed in terms this person could understand. More than you'd want to think about, he said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, very quietly, in a voice that was almost private, she said, Me too. And something in the room shifted, subtle as a key turning in a lock somewhere far away. A cleared his throat. You'll stay in the city, he said to Kaido. It was not a question. It had the cadence of a question but the structure of a statement, one of those political sentences that wanted to be in order but was testing the water first. Kaido looked at him. For now, he said. I want to learn more about this place. I held his gaze. And if I said it wasn't optional? I'd tell you that anything I do here, I'm choosing to do, Kaido said, without heat, without particular aggression. Just clean and clear. I'm not going to be anyone's prisoner, and I'm not going to be anyone's weapon. I don't think you actually want the alternative to me cooperating. Silence. Darui, behind A's left shoulder, made a very small sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a cough. A looked at Kaido for a long time. Then he said, No. I don't. He stood. You'll be given quarters. Someone will bring you a meal. We'll talk again tomorrow. He left, and Darui followed, and Yujito stayed. She sat there across from Kaido in the afternoon light and looked at him with those strange teal eyes, and Kaido looked back, and after a moment she said, You're really not afraid of him. Should I be? Kaido asked. She thought about it. Most people are, she said. Even people who probably shouldn't be. I'm not most people. No, she agreed, and there was something in her voice that was complicated and quiet and had been there for a while, he thought. Long before he arrived. You're really not. Outside the window, the hidden cloud moved through its afternoon routines, the shift changes, the market stalls, the children in the chalk-marked courtyard 2 levels down, and the sun pushed west toward the mountain ridges and started its slow collapse toward evening, painting the undersides of the clouds in colors that had no names in any language Kaido knew. He watched the city for a while longer. Then he looked at Yujito and said, Tell me about this place. Tell me everything. And she did. That night, in the quarters they'd given him, a room on the 4th floor of an administrative building, secure without being a cell, which he appreciated, Kaido sat on the windowsill with his knees up and his back against the frame and looked at the stars. He could feel the planet under him. He'd always been able to do that, feel the mass of whatever he was standing on, the weight and density and spin of it. It was just the passive awareness that came from having grown up in a body built to read the world through pressure and energy. This planet was large. Substantial. It felt like somewhere that could hold the amount of power he was carrying. That was something. That was actually something. He thought about Yujito's face when she'd said me too, that particular expression of someone used to carrying something they'd never named out loud, surprised by their own honesty. He thought about A's eyes, calculating and certain and slightly shaken for the first time, maybe, in years. He thought about Darui's not quite laugh, which was the sound of someone who had a sense of humor about impossible things and was maybe deciding whether this was one of them. He thought about his father's hands, briefly. He thought about the planet going bright. Then he stopped thinking about it because he was 12 and he had always been very good at putting things in boxes and closing them. It was one of the few gifts his first life had given him, the ability to survive grief by simply outmoving it. He looked at the stars for a while. One of them, he thought, was probably in the direction of where Vegeta had been. He didn't know which one. The navigation system had been too damaged to tell him much beyond trajectory and destination approximate, and he had no astronomical knowledge of this system yet to triangulate. It didn't matter, he decided. The direction of a thing that wasn't there anymore was just a direction. It didn't point at anything. He closed his eyes. He let his ki settle, that vast warm pressure of it, like banked coals in a furnace that was comfortably too large for the room it was in. He felt the city around him, the warm, irregular press of human life, 1,000 small signatures of chakra that he couldn't read with any precision but could feel in aggregate, like the hum of a crowd heard from a long way away. Alive, he thought. This place is genuinely alive. He had not felt that about a place in a while. He had not let himself. The night deepened around the hidden cloud, and the clouds came in off the mountains the way they did every night here, wrapping the city in something that was half mist and half weather, and the lights in the buildings below started going out one by one. Kaito stayed at the window until almost midnight. Not because he couldn't sleep, he could sleep anywhere, in any position, it was a Saiyan thing, but because he wasn't quite ready to stop looking yet. Tomorrow he would learn more. Tomorrow he would ask about the other villages and the political structure and the thing called chakra and all the 100 questions he'd stored up over the last day and a half. Tomorrow A would probably try to figure out what leverage he had over a 12-year-old Saiyan prince, and Kaito would probably have to be very clear about how little leverage that actually was. But tonight he just sat in the window of a city built on a mountain on a planet he'd never meant to land on, and he breathed the cold electric air, and he thought, I'm still here. He wasn't sure if that was a good thing or just a true thing. He decided it could be both. Chapter 2, What Kyumo Calls Hospitality. The first morning in the hidden cloud started with someone trying to put a seal on him while he slept. Kaito felt it before it touched him, a hand, moving with genuine skill and precision, tracing a pattern in the air approximately 4 inches above his left forearm. He'd been half awake already, the way Saiyans always were in unfamiliar territory, that top layer of sleep so thin it was almost just rest. His eyes were still closed when he caught the wrist. The person attached to the wrist made a sound like someone who had just put their hand in something unexpected. Kaito opened his eyes. It was a young man he hadn't seen before, maybe 16, with pale eyes and the particular look of someone who had been given an assignment they'd thought was simple and was rapidly revising that assessment. He was wearing the uniform of a hidden cloud shinobi, and he had, in his other hand, a brush still wet with something that was probably ink but smelled too complex to be just ink. Morning, Kaito said. The young man didn't speak. I'm going to let go of your wrist, Kaito said. And you're going to tell me who sent you and what that seal does. In that order. He let go. The young man scrambled back against the wall, knocking over the small table near the window, which sent a cup of water. Someone had left it there last night, a small hospitality he'd noticed and appreciated, skidding across the floor. He looked at the door, calculating, then looked at Kaito, who was sitting up on the bed with the specific relaxed attentiveness of someone who had already done all the math. The door's fine, Kaito said. You can leave whenever you want. But I'd really like the answer first. Silence. Then, monitoring seal, the young man said, very quietly. Passive. It just tracks your location and general energy output. Who sent you? A beat. The rakeage. Kaito nodded slowly. He wasn't particularly surprised. A was a practical man, they'd spoken for maybe 40 minutes, and practical men did not let 40 minutes of conversation substitute for information gathering when they had other options. It was sensible, honestly. Kaido would have done something similar. Okay, he said. The young man blinked. Okay. Tell the Reikage it didn't work, but I understand why he tried. Kaido stood and rolled his neck, feeling the vertebrae settle with a sound like distant knuckles. Also tell him next time he could just ask. I'll probably say no, but he could ask. The young man left very quickly, forgetting the brush on the floor. Kaido picked it up and set it on the windowsill. He looked out at the city in the early light. The clouds below the upper levels were burning off, the way they apparently did every morning, revealing the valley and the eastern ridges in slow golden increments. He'd slept well. Better than he'd expected. He got dressed, looked at the city for one more moment, and then went downstairs to find breakfast and trouble, both of which he suspected were in roughly the same direction. The food in the hidden cloud was, he was discovering, aggressively utilitarian. The breakfast he found at the commissary in the lower administrative building was rice and dried fish and something pickled that he couldn't identify but ate anyway because he was hungry enough that identification seemed like a secondary concern. He was on his second bowl of rice when Darui sat down across from him. You caught the sealing team, Darui said. There was a team. Kaido looked up. I only got one. The other two were in the hall. They were supposed to handle the fallback if you noticed the first one. Darui poured himself tea. He had the particular energy of someone who was naturally slow and deliberate in a way that had nothing to do with lethargy. Every movement was exactly as large as it needed to be, no more. You didn't notice them. I didn't go into the hall. Darui looked at his tea. The Reikage is annoyed. I figured. Kaido ate another spoonful of rice. You're here to tell me to come see him. I'm here to have breakfast, Darui said. The summons is for after. He paused. Also, Yujito wanted me to tell you that the training fields are on the east side if you wanted to stretch your legs before the meeting. She said, he stopped, like he was quoting carefully, that watching you move against actual resistance would probably be more informative than a seal, and the Reikage should know that. Kaido looked at him. She said that to A. She says a lot of things to A. He pretends not to listen and then does what she suggested. There was something in Darui's voice that was fond in a carefully maintained way, the affection of someone who had worked alongside another person long enough to stop pretending they weren't fond of them. She's very direct. I noticed, Kaido said. He meant it as a neutral observation. It came out slightly warmer than he intended. Darui noticed, and looked back at his tea, and said nothing, which was its own kind of commentary. The training fields were exactly where Yujito said they'd be, a broad-tiered complex on the eastern face of the mountain, carved into the rock in wide flat platforms connected by staircases, each level slightly lower than the one above, so the whole thing stepped down toward the valley like an enormous stone staircase built for something much larger than people. The lower fields were open training areas, smooth stone with painted markers. The upper levels had wooden posts and targets and equipment Kaido didn't have context for yet. Yujito was there when he arrived, working through a kata that moved from precise controlled strikes into something that suddenly wasn't controlled at all, fire, actual fire, shaping itself along her arms and then collapsing back into her like a tide going out. She finished the sequence as Kaido stepped onto the field and turned to face him without the particular self-consciousness of someone who'd been watched. You sleep okay? She asked. Until your Reikage sent someone to tag me like a mountain lion, yeah. She didn't quite smile. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. He's not my Reikage. Whose Reikage is he? Everyone's, technically. She looked at him with those teal eyes in the morning light. Nobody's, sometimes. Depends on the day. She paused. He wants to see what you can do. He's not going to say that directly, he'll give you some speech about cooperation and the village's interests and so on. But what he actually wants is to see a number. A scale. Something he can put in a box. Can he? No, she said, simply. But he'll try. Kaido looked at the field. It was wide and empty at this hour, the other training sessions apparently happening on the lower levels. "You want to spar?" he asked. She tilted her head. "I want to see what you are," she said. "That's different from sparring." "It really isn't." "A beat." Then she settled into a stance that was casual and ready simultaneously, her weight distributed with the ease of someone who had been doing this since before she could clearly remember, and said, "Don't hold back because I'm a woman." "I wasn't going to," Kaido said, genuinely surprised the disclaimer was necessary. "Good," she said, and came at him. She was fast. Genuinely fast, the kind of fast that came from years of absolute commitment to a body that had been trained to the edge of what it could handle, and when she hit with more force than her frame suggested. He caught her first strike on his forearm and actually felt it, a good solid impact that would have broken a normal arm in 3 places. She didn't stop at the first strike, flowed directly into the second and the third, reading his blocks with the quick adaptation of a high-level fighter. He let her drive the pace for about 10 seconds. Just to get a real feel for it. Then he started moving. He didn't blur, he didn't want to be dramatic about it, didn't want to show off in the way that shut down information exchange and replaced it with intimidation. He just matched her speed and then exceeded it, not by a little, by a margin that was significant enough to shift the quality of the engagement from mutual exchange to something where she was reading him and he was reading the space between her moves. He caught her wrist on the 4th attack, redirected rather than blocked, used her momentum to pull her slightly off the line she'd chosen, and stepped into the gap with a palm strike to the shoulder that was controlled, maybe 30% of what it could have been, but still carried enough weight to push her back 2 feet on a stone training ground. She caught herself. Looked at him. There was something bright in her eyes. "Again," she said. They went for 20 minutes. She escalated steadily, and he matched each escalation, and the field around them started to accumulate the particular charged energy of a serious exchange, the crack of impacts, the rush of displaced air when he moved at 3/4 speed, once a flash of her actual power when she stopped holding back and let the chakra open up, and the temperature on the field spiked dramatically and something that was not quite fire and not quite a living thing moved behind her eyes for a fraction of a second. He felt it. The tailed beast. The 2 tails, Matatabi, a presence like a burning wind, vast and ancient and watching him with feline curiosity through the medium of Yujito's body. He didn't react to it beyond a slight nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, beast to beast in the sense that he carried something in him too, not a prisoner, just blood, just the genetic echo of 10,000 years of being the most dangerous thing in whatever room he was standing in. She felt the acknowledgement. He could tell by the way she blinked, a tiny reset, like the presence behind her eyes had sat back slightly, reassessing. They stopped by mutual agreement when Darui appeared at the edge of the field, watching with his hands in his pockets and his expression several layers deeper than usual. Yujito was breathing harder than Kaido, which he genuinely hadn't intended as a statement but clearly landed as one. She rolled her shoulder, the one he'd hit, not because it hurt, it was fine, she was too tough for it to hurt much, but with the automatic gesture of cataloging it. She looked at him. "You were going easy," she said. "I didn't hurt you," he said, which was a slightly different answer. "You could have hurt me." "Yeah," he said, without apology. "I could have." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The 2 tails noticed you." "I noticed her noticing," he said. "She says," Yujito paused, an internal conversation happening in the space behind her eyes. "She says you smell like something very old. Something that fought stars." Kaido thought about Vegeta, about its red sky and its volcanic plains, about the training grounds where his father's soldiers had fought each other with enough force to reshape the local geography. "That's accurate," he said. Yujito looked at him for one more moment, something working out behind her face, and then she glanced at Darui. "Is it time?" "Yeah," Darui said. "A's waiting." The Reikich's office was exactly what Kaido had expected, large, spare, built for function rather than impression, with a desk that had seen actual use and windows that looked out over the whole of the hidden cloud in a way that said I watch all of this, constantly. The walls had maps, strategic ones, covered in markings that Kaido couldn't read yet but could parse in structure: territorial, threat assessment, resource. A was standing when they came in. Not sitting behind the desk, standing in the middle of the room, arms crossed, with the specific energy of a man who had made a decision and was fairly certain about it. He looked at Kaido. Then at Darui. Then back at Kaido. "You sparred with Yujito this morning," he said. She asked. "You hit her." "She hit me first. Several times." Kaido met his eyes. "She's very good." A's expression moved through several things quickly. "She's one of the 5 strongest shinobi in this village." "She is," Kaido agreed. "And I'd recommend not sending her against anything that could seriously hurt her, because she's worth protecting." He paused. "She's also not afraid of things she should be afraid of, which is either a virtue or a problem depending on the day." The silence in the room was the kind that happened when someone said something that was perceptive and the other person hadn't expected perceptive and was now recalibrating. A unfolded his arms. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing," Kaido said, not rudely, just simply. A's eyes narrowed. Not angrily, assessingly. He didn't sit either. They stood across from each other in the large room with Darui off to the side quietly existing and the maps on the walls bearing witness. "The SEAL team told me you knew they were there before they touched you," A said. "Yes. You can sense ki in other people." "Yes. Can you sense chakra?" "In aggregate. Not individual signatures, not precisely." "I'm learning the difference." He tilted his head. "Can you sense ki?" "No," A said. "Nothing. You register as empty." He looked at Kaido steadily. "That's a problem. For you, maybe. For both of us. I can't assess what I can't read." A move to the desk, not to sit behind it but to lean against its edge, a slightly less formal position that suggested he was shifting registers intentionally. "I'll be direct." "Please," Kaido said. "You're 12. You're from somewhere I have no information about, using a power system I have no framework for. You've demonstrated physical capabilities that exceed my jonin. You're not afraid of me, which means either you're stupid or you know something I don't." He looked at Kaido. "You're clearly not stupid." "Thank you. So what do you want?" A said. "Not what you told me yesterday, I heard that, I'm asking what you actually want. Long term. You're here. You can apparently do whatever you can do. What is it for?" Kaido was quiet for a moment. It was a real question. He appreciated real questions. He'd been given a lot of careful, political, angled questions over the last day and a half and this was the first one that just came straight. "I want to learn this world," he said. "I want to understand it. I want to find out if there's something here worth protecting." He looked at I had something to protect before. A world, a people. I was 12 and it didn't matter how strong I was, I couldn't stop what happened. I've had a lot of time in a very small pod to think about whether I want to find another thing or just, he paused. Just float. Silence. And? A said. And I don't float well, Kaido said. I'm terrible at it. Something shifted in A's face. It was subtle. A was a man who had spent decades maintaining a public expression and it was well maintained, but it shifted, something that might have been, in another context, recognition. You could be useful here, A said. Probably, Kaido agreed. I could offer you a place. Resources. Training in chakra-based techniques, if that's something you want. It might be interesting, Kaido said. To learn. In return, A said, I'd want cooperation. Information about yourself, your abilities, honestly reported. I'd want advance notice before you do anything that could be a political incident. Kaido looked at him. And if I disagree with something you decide? Then we discuss it. And if we disagree after discussion? met his eyes. Then we deal with that when it comes. It was, Kaido thought, the most honest political offer he'd ever been made. It was also calculated. It was smart enough to know that trying to cage Kaido directly would end badly, so he was offering a cage with very wide bars and calling it cooperation. The bars were wide enough that they were almost just walls, and walls were different. You could choose to stand inside walls. Okay, Kaido said. Raised an eyebrow. Just okay. For now, Kaido said. We'll see how it goes. The next 2 weeks moved quickly. Kaido learned the city the way he learned everything, by moving through it and paying attention, absorbing context through friction and encounter rather than study. He learned the structure, the administrative center at the peak, the residential districts cascading down the mountain's face in tiers, the market on the third level that ran 6 days a week, the training complexes at the east face. He learned the hierarchy, Jonin above Chunin above Genin, with the rakeage at the apex and his closest advisors, including Darui, sitting just below. He learned the languages of the body, the way Cloud Shinobi moved differently from how the Saiyan soldiers had moved, the different grammar of combat. Chakra-based movement was in some ways more versatile and in some ways more constrained than pure ki-based fighting, and understanding the difference helped him understand what the people around him could and couldn't do, which was more valuable than most pieces of tactical knowledge. He learned that Killer Bee existed by hearing about him for a week before actually meeting him. B was the Rakich's younger brother, the Eight-Tails Jinchuriki, a living engine of destruction wrapped in a personality that communicated entirely in rap verses and what appeared to be sincere, unironic enthusiasm for everything. Kaido had been in the city for 12 days before B returned from a mission, and the return announced itself 2 levels before B actually appeared because B apparently communicated his arrivals through volume. He came into the training field where Kaido was working through ki compression exercises, stacking energy in progressively denser configurations, a thing he'd been doing since he was 6 but that felt differently here, in this denser atmosphere, the ki responding to the planet's gravity with a specific quality he was still mapping, and B stopped at the edge of the field and looked at Kaido with the expression of someone who had heard reports and was now conducting personal verification. "You're the boy who fell," B said. Then, apparently irresistibly, from the sky above, not a bird or a plane, "Call him the alien, gonna drive A insane, please don't," Kaido said, without looking up from his exercise. B blinked. "You don't like rap." "I don't understand rap. It's been 2 weeks, my vocabulary is still catching up." Kaido opened his eyes and looked at him. "You're the Eight-Tails." B's expression changed, not offended, something more genuine. Surprised, maybe. "You can sense him." "Something large," Kaido said. "Something that's been alive long enough that it has the specific weight of something very old. Like your partner feels like the whole inside of the earth pushed into one body." He tilted his head. "He's also watching me. They all do, the tailed beasts that are around. Like they're trying to figure out what I am." B was quiet for a moment, which based on what Kaido had been told was unusually quiet for B. Then he said, not in a verse, "Gyuki says you remind him of someone. He won't say who." He looked at Kaido with large, direct eyes. "He says you carry something too." "I carry Saiyan blood," Kaido said. 10,000 years of it. That's probably what he's feeling." "That's a lot of years," B said. "Yeah." Kaido stood and rolled his shoulders. "You want to fight?" B's face broke into a grin that was enormous and entirely genuine. "Oh, I've been waiting for someone to ask that for months," he said, and cracked his knuckles. "Let's go." What followed was, objectively, the best fight Kaido had had since landing. B didn't ease in, he committed from the first exchange with the full power of someone who had been doing this his whole life and loved it completely, the Eight-Tails chakra moving through him in waves that were visible as heat distortion. He used 7 swords in a rotation that should not have been physically possible and was anyway, that was the thing about high-level shinobi, they treated should not be possible as a suggestion at best. Kaido loved it. He laughed during the third exchange, a real laugh, the kind he hadn't produced in a while. When B hit him hard enough to actually move him, and B's face went through surprise and then delight and then absolute determination to do it again. They fought for 40 minutes. They broke 2 of the stone training posts and left a crater approximately 8 feet in diameter at the center of the field. By the end both of them were breathing hard, Kaido harder than he'd been with Yujito, which meant B had genuinely pushed him, which meant B was something special, and they were sitting in the crater they'd made, backs against the wall, and B was looking at the sky with the expression of someone who had found something they'd been looking for without knowing they were looking. "You're real," B said. "I hope so," Kaido said. "I mean," B looked at him. "You're actually real." "Like," he laughed, a great booming sound. "I hit you, you hit me, we're both here." Nobody disappeared, nobody cried, nobody is writing a report about property damage. He glanced at the broken posts. "Well, nobody important is writing a report." Kaido smiled. "Darui is definitely writing a report." "Darui writes reports about his reports," B said, with enormous fondness. "That's just who he is." He looked at Kaido. "Why'd you come here?" "To the cloud specifically." "Pod went where the pod went," Kaido said. "I didn't choose it." "But you stayed," B said. "You could have left." Kaido was quiet for a moment. Above them, the clouds were doing their afternoon thing, building up along the ridges in slow white towers. "I stayed because there was something worth staying for," he said finally. "People worth being around." He paused. "And because I hate leaving before I understand something." "What don't you understand?" "Everything," Kaido said. "This whole world. The chakra, the nations, the whole architecture of it. I want to understand it." B nodded slowly. "A doesn't know what to do with you," he said, without preempting it. "I know. He's scared," B said. "Not of you exactly. Of what you represent. Something he can't quantify." He looked at his hands. "He's been trying to find a way to measure you since you got here." "I know that too." "He'll try something bigger than a seal next," B said. "That's just how he is. He respects things he's tested. He has to test them first." He looked at Kaido. "Don't kill anyone when he does." "I wasn't planning to," Kaido said. "Good. Because I'd be annoyed." B said it simply, the way you said things to someone you decided, in 40 minutes of genuine combat, was worth saying things to. Kaido looked at him. "You'd be annoyed?" "You're interesting," B said, as if this were a complete explanation. "Interesting things should stick around." The test came on the 16th day. Kaido felt it building in the 2 days before it happened, a subtle shift in the energy of the city, the way certain people moved around him with slightly different attention, the way Darui was quieter than usual and Yujito had a look she kept almost showing and then pulling back. He didn't ask about it. He waited. On the 16th morning he was in the market. He'd found that the third-level market was the best place to absorb information about how normal the hidden cloud worked, the rhythm of daily life beneath the military and political machinery, when the square emptied. Not gradually. Just, people who had been there were not there, and the stalls that had been staffed were unstaffed, and the particular quality of the silence that settled in was the silence of cleared space, of an audience that had relocated to windows and rooftops rather than disappearing. Then 7 jonin stepped into the square. Kaido stopped and looked at them. 7 was interesting. 7 was not a training exercise, was not a casual assessment. 7 jonin deployed together was a statement of intent, a message about how seriously someone was taking the target. He recognized 3 of the faces from the training fields, seen in passing. The others were new. Their leader was a woman, broad-shouldered, with a scar across her jaw and the calm eyes of someone who had done this before and expected to do it again. She looked at Kaido with professional steadiness. "The Reikage requests a demonstration," she said. "Of what?" Kaido asked. "Your limits." He looked at the 7 of them. He looked at the empty market. He looked at the faces in the windows, dozens of them, hidden cloud civilians and shinobi off-duty, watching from above with expressions that ranged from curious to worried to the specific look of people who had been told something was going to happen and hadn't quite believed it until now. Kaido turned back to the 7 jonin. "Okay," he said. He didn't wait for them to come to him. That seemed rude. They'd been organized, they had a plan, he should let them execute their plan. He stood with his hands in his pockets and watched them flow into their formation, a good formation, designed to cover multiple vectors and share threat load, and he noticed the leader's hand movement that triggered it, and he thought, with the part of his brain that had been doing tactical analysis since he was old enough to watch his father's war councils, that's a very good formation for most situations. Not this one, but most. They hit him from 3 directions simultaneously. Good timing, excellent coordination. 3 simultaneous strikes that should have crossed their trajectories at the point where he was standing, eliminating the possibility of evading all 3. He stepped sideways. Just sideways, 1 step, to the exact position that was out of reach of all 3 attack vectors by the largest possible margin, and the 3 strikes crossed each other through empty air, and the 3 shinobi had to abort and redirect immediately to avoid their own momentum carrying them into each other. The other 4 came then, the follow-up, the actual attack, while the first 3 created the opening. He moved through them. Not away, through, into the gaps between them, the spaces in the formation that opened for a fraction of a second as the second wave committed. He moved at something like 70% of what he could do in terms of speed, which on this field meant he was crossing distances in ways that registered as wrong to the human eye, and he touched each of the 4, a tap on the shoulder of one, a light grip on the wrist of another, a hand placed briefly on the back of the third that carried a specific controlled output of ki that was enough to communicate what it would have meant at full power without actually hurting anyone. He came out the other side of the formation and stood still. 6 seconds. The whole thing had taken 6 seconds. The 7 jonin regrouped with the quickness of experienced fighters. They hadn't panicked, they hadn't frozen, they'd adapted as fast as their training allowed. But the quality of the moment had changed. It was in their stances, in the way the leader's breathing had shifted almost imperceptibly, in the silence from the windows above. Again, he asked. They came again. Better this time, they'd processed the first exchange, made adjustments. He was genuinely impressed. These were very good fighters and they were thinking in real time, which was actually harder than it sounded. He was faster this time. Not dramatically, not show-off fast, just precisely faster than whatever adjustment they'd made, staying 1 calculation ahead. He let the leader actually hit him once, a solid punch that landed on his jaw and would have rocked a normal person back several feet, and he didn't move. He just stood there and let it happen and looked at her after it made contact with an expression that wasn't contemptuous. He wasn't contemptuous, she'd thrown a good punch, but was simply calm. Her face told him she understood. He watched the understanding arrive, clean and sudden, and he gave her a nod. She held up a fist. Her team stopped. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned and looked directly at a window on the 2nd floor of the building adjacent to the square, a window where a figure was standing that Kaido had clocked 30 seconds after the square emptied. "Lord Raikage," she said. "I have nothing else to offer." The window was quiet for a moment. Then A's voice came down, and there was something in it that Kaido had not heard from him before, a quality that was not quite respect and not quite something else, that sat in the middle distance between them like a new country that had just appeared on a map. "Come up," A said. Kaido walked across the empty market and into the building and up the stairs, and the 7 jonin stood where they were, and the people in the windows watched him go, and the hidden cloud was very quiet in the way of a place that had just had something it thought it understood rearranged at the foundation. A was standing at the window when Kaido came in. He didn't turn immediately. He stayed looking at the square below, his enormous hands clasped behind his back, and Kaido stood in the room and waited. "When I was 19, A said, still looking at the window, I fought my father. The 2nd Raikage. In a real match, full power, no holding back, because that was how our family tested things. It's how we always tested things. He paused. I lost. But he worked for it. He actually worked for it. He told me afterward that was the first time in 30 years that someone had made him work for it. He turned from the window. He looked at Kaito with eyes that had something new in them. Those were my 7 best jonin, he said. They're very good, Kaito said. The woman in charge, her tactical adjustment in the second engagement was excellent. They didn't touch you. She landed a punch. She landed a punch, A repeated, and his voice had a tone that indicated this was not a point in his favor. He looked at Kaito steadily. What are you, Kaito? Not what are Saiyans. What are you, specifically? What is the number? There isn't a number, Kaito said. Everything has a number. Everything you've ever measured has a number, Kaito said. That's a different thing. He met A's eyes. I told you. I get stronger when I fight things that push me. The more serious the fight, the larger the jump. Right now I'm 12 and I've been eating well for 2 weeks and sparring with good people. He paused. 2 years ago I was nowhere near this. 2 years from now, he stopped. You don't know, A said. I don't know, Kaito agreed. A was quiet. He moved away from the window and sat behind his desk, not with the posture of a man taking a formal position but with the posture of a man sitting down to think. He looked at his hands. He looked at Kaito. There are other nations, he said. 5 major villages. Political relationships that have been built over decades, some of them through war, some through truce. This village has interests, and those interests sometimes put it in conflict with others. He paused. An entity living in this village that cannot be measured, cannot be sealed, cannot be controlled, that is a political problem. I know, Kaito said. Then you understand my position. I understand it, Kaito said. I don't agree with your conclusion. A raised an eyebrow. Your conclusion is that because you can't measure me, you need to find a way to contain me. That's the logic. Kaito looked at him. But think about it differently. Because you can't measure me, you can't explain me to anyone else either. To Konoha, to Sand, to anyone. So no one knows what I am. And the story you tell about what I am, that's controlled entirely by what we do here. He gestured between them. Together. The room was very still. Darui, by the door, was not even pretending to look at the floor. A looked at Kaito for a very long moment. Then he said, You're 12 years old. 12-year-olds can be right, Kaito said. A sat back in his chair. He looked at the ceiling, briefly, the way people looked at ceilings when they were conceding something to themselves. Then, there's a council meeting tonight. You'll attend. He looked back down. As an observer. Sure, Kaito said. Not a participant. An observer. Right, Kaito said. Don't speak unless I'm spoken to. Yes. He kept his face neutral. I understand councils. A looked at him. The corner of his mouth moved, very slightly, in a direction that was almost wry. I'd say I doubt that, he said, but you keep doing that thing where you're right, so. He waved a hand. Go. Come back at sunset. Kaito went. He found Yujito in the hallway, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed, and from her expression she'd been there long enough to hear most of it through the door, which she was clearly not embarrassed about. Observer, she said. For now, Kaito said. She fell into step beside him. They walked down the stairs without speaking for a moment, their footsteps the only sound in the stairwell. You know he's still trying to find the angle, she said. The thing that gives him leverage. I know, Kaito said. Let him try. He glanced at her sideways. There isn't one. She was quiet for a moment. Then, in that private, almost to herself voice she used sometimes, the one that came out when she wasn't performing competence, what's it like? Not having anything they could use. He thought about it honestly. Like standing in the rain, he said. And not being worried about getting wet. She thought about that. Outside, at the base of the stairs, the market was slowly refilling, the stalls coming back, the voices rising as if a held breath was releasing. The city going back to its business. Moving on. She looked at him, and something in her face that had been held carefully for a long time sat slightly more easily, like a knot that had been loosened but not untied. I'd like to know what that feels like, she said. You've got more power than you think, Kaido said. You just keep asking permission to use it. She opened her mouth to respond and then didn't, and they walked out into the afternoon together and the hidden cloud rose around them, old stone and cloud and the smell of ginger and garlic from the food stall somewhere below, and Kaido thought, for the second time since landing, for the first time with something that felt like certainty, this place could matter. That was the most dangerous thought he knew how to have. He had it anyway. Chapter 3, Old Habits Die with the World. The council meeting lasted 3 hours and taught Kaido more about the hidden cloud than 2 weeks of walking its streets. There were 9 of them around the table, A at the head, Darui to his left, 5 senior Jonin commanders whose names Kaido catalogued immediately and attached to faces, and 2 civilian administrators who dealt with trade and supply lines and had the specific energy of people who were very important and frequently reminded of it in ways that made them slightly exhausting. Kaido sat against the wall, away from the table, in the seat of someone who had been told to observe and had decided to take that instruction at face value. For the first 40 minutes he did exactly that. He listened. He watched the way information moved around the table, who deferred to whom, who pushed back, who said the real thing and who said the political version of the real thing. He watched her run the room with the particular efficiency of a man who had been doing this long enough that it had become physical, the way he leaned forward to close a topic and leaned back to open one, the small hand movements that directed attention like a conductor. It was a good council. Not perfect. There was a senior commander named Omoi's superior, a heavy-set man called Genma who had a habit of asking questions he already knew the answers to as a way of redirecting credit, but functionally good. They made decisions. The decisions had reasons. The reasons were mostly sound. Then one of the civilian administrators said, and the matter of the foreign entity, and the room changed temperature. Kaido watched them not look at him. Every person at the table performed the specific social operation of discussing something in the room without acknowledging the thing in the room, and he let them do it because he was genuinely curious about the shape of the conversation when he wasn't a participant in it. The summary was this: word had reached the Hidden Cloud's intelligence network, and they had won, a good one, because A was nothing if not thorough, that Konoha had received reports of the crash. Seismic readings, displaced atmospheric pressure, something that a Konoha sensor team had flagged as anomalous. They had sent observers. Observers, Darui said. Or scouts. The distinction is contextual, the administrator said. The distinction is whether they're gathering information or assessing a target, Darui said, still in that relaxed voice that somehow carried edge when it wanted to. Those are different things. I hadn't spoken yet. He was looking at the table in the way he looked at things when he was several steps ahead of the current conversation and waiting for everyone else to catch up. Konoha will want information, said one of the Jonin commanders, a woman named Samui, cool and precise, who had the distinction of being the only person at the table whose assessment Kaido thought was consistently accurate. They will not make a move without it. The question is what information reaches them and from whom. It reaches them from us, A said. His first words in 40 minutes. Everyone at the table recalibrated slightly toward him. We control the narrative. The entity is a refugee. A child. Under cloud protection pending integration. He paused. We present this as humanitarian before anyone else can present it as threatening. Kaido, against the wall, did not change his expression. Entity, he noted. Refugee. Pending integration. A was framing him to his own council as something being managed, something with a status that had been assigned by Cloud Authority. It was smart, it was exactly the framing that would discourage Konoha from treating him as a free variable. It also was not something they had discussed with Kaito. He waited until the meeting concluded and the council filed out, and then he waited while Darui and Samui lingered to discuss logistics, and then he waited while they signed 3 documents that had been placed in front of him by an aide. Then the room was empty except for the 2 of them. "Refugee," Kaito said. I didn't look up from the 4th document. It's a political category. It's also a specific word. With specific implications. Kaito moved away from the wall and closer to the table, not aggressively, just refusing the distance. It implies I'm under your protection. It implies Cloud has a claim on me. It implies Cloud is responsible for you, A said. He set down the brush. Which is more defensible than the alternative? What's the alternative? That a 12-year-old with immeasurable power is operating independently in the land of lightning with no affiliation and no oversight. I looked at him. Think about what Konoha does with that information. Kaito thought about it. He didn't like it, but he thought about it honestly, which was the only way thinking about things was worth doing. O was right. In the calculus of how nation-states responded to unknown variables, an unaffiliated one was more threatening than an affiliated one, because an affiliation meant accountability, meant someone to hold responsible, meant a chain of consequence that could be understood and therefore managed. An unaffiliated one meant anything could happen and nobody was on record for it. You could have told me before you said it to your council, Kaito said. You were in the room, A said. You know what I mean. O was quiet for a moment. Then, yes, he said. I could have. He looked at Kaito with something that was almost, but not quite, an apology. I made a decision in the meeting. I moved faster than the conversation I should have had first. The acknowledgement was genuine. Kaito could tell, A was not a man who acknowledged things as a manipulation tactic. He acknowledged them because he had decided to, and that was that. It was actually one of the things Kaito respected about him. Don't do it again, Kaito said. I'll try, A said, which was probably as much as he was going to get. He picked up the brush again. Konoha's observers will arrive in approximately 5 days. I'll want you present for the meeting. As an observer? Kaito said. A's mouth moved. As yourself, he said. Yujito found him the next morning before breakfast, sitting in the training field watching the sunrise do its slow work on the mountain peaks to the east. She had food, 2 bowls of something steaming that she set between them when she sat, cross-legged, next to him. You heard, he said. I hear most things, she said. The walls in this complex are about as soundproof as intentions. He picked up the bowl and ate. It was good, thick, savory, with pieces of something he'd learned was tofu and something else he hadn't identified but kept eating anyway. The mornings here had a specific quality he'd started to pay attention to, the way the light came in low and golden before the clouds built up, the way the whole mountain seemed to breathe differently in the early hours. Does it bother you? She asked. The refugee thing. It bothers me that he didn't ask, Kaito said. The word itself, he considered. It's accurate. I don't have a home. I don't have a people. I'm somewhere I didn't choose by circumstances I couldn't control. He looked at the sunrise. I just don't like being categorized by other people. I'll categorize myself, thanks. What would you call yourself? She asked. He thought about it. Scion, he said. That's the only real answer. Everything else is just address. She was quiet for a moment. The steam rose from her bowl. Below them, the city was beginning its morning sounds, the first voices, the first footsteps on stone. The 2 tails is a category I didn't choose either, she said, not looking at him. He didn't say anything. He let it sit. They call us Jinchuriki, she continued. Like it's a title. Like it means something other than, she stopped. Like we're the containers. Not the people. You know what the tailed beasts actually are? He asked. She glanced at him. Matatabi, Gyuki, the others. What they actually are. Enormous chakra entities, she said. Fragments of the 10 tails, from the old stories. They're old, Kaido said. That's the thing. Older than your villages, older than your nations. Older than most of the structures people have built around them. He looked at her. Being old doesn't make something property. She was very still. And being powerful, he said, doesn't make someone a container. The silence that followed was the kind that happened when something was said that had been true for a long time and was finally allowed to be true out loud. He watched her process it, the careful work of someone who had been managing a belief for years and was only now checking whether it held weight. Matatabi has been talking to me more, she said finally. Since you arrived. What does she say? She says you're a good omen. Yujito's voice was dry. She says good omens are usually preceded by significant disruption. Kaido laughed. It came out honest and clear, and Yujito looked at him sideways, and then the corner of her mouth lifted and she looked away again before it became anything more than that. Significant disruption, he said. That tracks. 3 days later, the first message arrived from Konoha. It came through official channels, a sealed scroll delivered by a Jonin courier who handed it to A's aide with the professional blankness of someone delivering paperwork rather than something that would rearrange several people's mornings. Kaido heard about it from Darui, who came to find him in the library. He'd been spending 2 hours each afternoon in the library, working through basic texts on chakra theory and the history of the elemental nations, building context, and told him with the particular neutral tone that meant the information had implications he was letting Kaido calculate himself. The message was from the Hokage. It acknowledged the reports from Konoha's sensor teams. It noted the anomalous energy readings from the crash site, which their teams had examined. They'd found the pod, then. It requested, with the careful diplomatic language that meant the same thing as demanded but with softer grammar, that the hidden cloud provide full information about the foreign entity currently residing in the village. Entity again, Kaido said, setting down the text he'd been reading. A history of the First Shinobi War, dry as chalk, but the political architecture underneath it was genuinely fascinating. It's the word everyone's using, Darui said. Except B calls you the Sky Kid. I'm aware of what B calls me. He means it affectionately. I know. Kaido leaned back. What does it want to do about Konoha? Reply. Formal, diplomatic, acknowledge their interest, provide limited information, the refugee framing, the age, general description of circumstances. Darui paused. He also wants to know if you'll write something. First person. A brief statement of your own presence here. Kaido looked at him. Why? Because a statement from you directly undercuts the narrative that Cloud is managing you, Darui said. It positions you as an independent actor who has made a voluntary choice, which is harder for Konoha to respond to with a retrieval or containment argument. He paused again, and this pause was slightly longer than the first. It was actually Yujito's idea. Kaido was quiet for a moment. Then he said, she's good at this. She's good at everything she does, Darui said, with that same fond and careful tone he used when the subject was Yujito. She just doesn't make it obvious. I'll write the statement, Kaido said. He pulled a blank sheet from the stack beside him. Give me 10 minutes. What he wrote was short. He'd always been better at being direct than being eloquent, and direct was more useful here anyway. He gave his name, his origin, a single-sentence explanation, my world was destroyed and this is where my escape pod landed, and then a statement of his own volition, that he was in the hidden cloud because he had chosen to be, and that he was not affiliated with any village in any way that constituted military or political obligation, and that he was available to speak with any party who wished to understand his circumstances directly. He handed it to Darui. Darui read it. His expression moved through several things. You just invited every village to come talk to you. Yes. A is going to have thoughts about that. A can have thoughts, Kaido said. He'll be fine. Darui looked at the statement. Then at Kaito. Then at the statement again. You wrote this in 10 minutes. I knew what I wanted to say, Kaito said, and went back to his history text. A did of thoughts. A expressed them at length the following morning in what was technically a briefing but functioned more like a controlled explosion with very precise targeting. He stood behind his desk. A was always standing when he was most serious, the desk a prop rather than a position, and looked at Kaito with the expression of a man counting to something internally. You've just told every major village they can come directly to you, A said. Yes. Bypassing, I haven't bypassed anyone, Kaito said. I said I was available to speak with parties who wanted to understand my circumstances. I didn't say I was available to negotiate anything, or offer anything, or represent anyone. He met A's eyes. I'm a person. People can come talk to me. Konoha won't read it that way. Konoha will read it the way Konoha reads everything. But sand might read it differently, and mist might read it differently, and that variety of reading is useful for you. He let that sit for a moment. If I'm only accessible through you, I'm your asset. If I'm accessible directly, I'm a variable every village has to account for individually. That makes me complicated to make moves against. Silence. Darui, by the door, was looking at something on the wall with very focused attention. I looked at Kaito for a long time. Where did you learn political strategy? My father had war councils from when I was 8, Kaito said. I used to sit in the corner and watch. He thought I was too young to understand. He paused. He was wrong. Something moved across A's face, grief adjacent, the look of a man who recognized the specific loss of underestimating a child and had perhaps experienced the other side of that dynamic. It passed quickly. Fine, he said. We send it as written. He sat down, finally. The Konoha observers arrive in 2 days. They'll want to meet you. I'll arrange a formal meeting, my office, not theirs. They're observers, Kaito said. Who? Their intelligence expects someone significant. Based on the seismic readings and the pod recovery, they know the crash was not a meteorite. A picked up a report from his desk. They're sending someone from their analysis division and, likely, a combat specialist. Konoha always sends a combat specialist when the situation is unknown. Who's their combat specialist? Kaito asked. I looked at the report. Someone they call the copy ninja, he said. Hatake Kakashi. Kakashi arrived 2 days later, at mid-morning, and he did it in exactly the way Kaito would have predicted from the name, quietly, without announcement, already inside the city by the time the gate checkpoint registered his presence, which was either deliberate or habit and in Kakashi's case was probably both. He had silver hair, a mask covering most of his face, and one eye that was permanently closed and one that saw approximately everything. He found Kaito in the market. Not the other way around. Kaito was buying dried apricots. He'd found a particular stall on the 3rd level that had them, and they were the closest thing to a fruit from the Saiyan diet that this world had produced so far, when he felt the present settle into a position 20 feet behind him with the practiced ease of someone for whom surveillance was a resting state. He bought the apricots. He ate one. He turned around. Kakashi was leaning against a market stall with a small orange book, reading, with the specific energy of someone who was not reading. You're not subtle, Kaito said. Kakashi looked up over the edge of the book. His one visible eye curved slightly. I'm actually very subtle, he said. You're just abnormally perceptive. You're Konoha's observer, Kaito said. Not a question. One of them. My colleague is currently with the rakeage, handling the official portion. He turned a page without looking at it. I took the other portion. The less official portion. Hm. He closed the book, finally, and looked at Kaito with both, well, one eye. You're younger than the report suggested. I'm 12, Kaito said, for what felt like the 100th time. Do you want an apricot? Kakashi blinked. It was the specific blink of someone who had expected many possible responses and not that one. Sure, he said. Kaido held one out. Kakashi took it, pulled his mask down briefly to eat it, and pulled it back up so quickly it was almost theoretical. They're good, Kaido said. Third stall on the left has them. Kakashi looked at the stall. Looked at Kaido. The formal meeting is in 2 hours, he said. I know. Would you prefer to have the informal conversation now, or after? Kaido appreciated this directly. Kakashi was not pretending to be casual, he was being casual, which was different, and he was also being openly strategic, which was the thing that made Kaido willing to engage with him. Now is fine, he said. Walk with me. They walked through the market together, which must have looked bizarre to anyone watching, the silver-haired jonin with his orange book tucked under his arm and the 12-year-old foreign prince eating apricots, moving through the stalls with the conversational ease of two people who had known each other for years rather than 7 minutes. The pod, Kakashi said. Our team analyzed it. The materials aren't from any known source. The engineering is, not from this world. Correct, Kaido said. The energy readings from the crash site took our sensors 3 days to normalize. They said it was like standing next to something that had recently been next to a star. Saiyan pods run on a particular fuel, Kaido said. It's not dangerous now. It's just residue. Kakashi looked at him sideways. You're not worried about how much we know. You know what you found at the crash site, Kaido said. That's fine. It doesn't tell you very much about me. He ate another apricot. You want to know if I'm a threat? To Konoha specifically, or in general? Both, Kaido said. No. I'm not a threat to Konoha. I'm not a threat to anyone who doesn't make the specific decision to become a threat to me. He looked at Kakashi. Is that clear? Surprisingly clear, Kakashi said. Most people that powerful are vaguer. I hate vague, Kaido said. Kakashi was quiet for a moment, walking, his hands in his pockets and his eye on the market around them. The Hokage will want to meet you, he said. Eventually. Probably, Kaido agreed. I'm not opposed. What are you opposed to? Kaido thought about it. People making decisions about me without talking to me first, he said. Specifically. He glanced at the side of Kakashi's face. Your village has a history with that. Something tightened very slightly in Kakashi's posture. You've been reading our history. The library here is good. I made sure of it. Kaido stopped at a stall selling skewers and bought 2, handed one to Kakashi. The Nine-Tails attack. The ceiling. The way the village treated the Jinchuriki after. He looked at the skewer. I read that and I thought, this place would look at something it can't control and decide to cage it. I'd like to know if that instinct has changed. Kakashi took the skewer. He was quiet for a long moment. It's changing, he said. Slowly. Good, Kaido said. Slowly is better than not at all. They ate and walked, and the market moved around them, and the clouds came in off the mountains the way they did every morning, and the hidden cloud went about its Tuesday business with total indifference to the fact that 2 people in its market were quietly, over skewers, beginning the first real conversation between Kaido and the wider elemental nations. The formal meeting in A's office was exactly as formal as advertised. The Konoha analysis specialist, a woman named Nara Shikaku's subordinate, whose name was Inoichi, with kind eyes and a way of listening that was almost physical, sat across the table from A and Darui and asked careful questions and received careful answers, and Kaido sat in the chair he'd been assigned to this time, at the table rather than against the wall, and when Inoichi looked at him he answered directly and without performance. The meeting was uneventful in the way that meetings are uneventful when both sides are being too careful to actually say anything. After, walking out through the administrative corridor, Kakashi fell into step beside Kaido again for a moment. He had his book out, which Kaido was beginning to understand was a kind of conversational armor. You handled that well, Kakashi said. I didn't handle anything. I just talked. Talking is handling, Kakashi said. When you do it right. He looked at the corridor ahead. Inoichi is one of our best information specialists. He reads people the way most people read text. He'll have reported everything about you that you communicated, and several things you didn't intend to. What did I communicate? Kaito asked. Confidence without aggression. Independence without hostility. Intelligence that's comfortable not proving itself. Kakashi turned a page. He'll tell the Hokage you're genuine. I am genuine. I know, Kakashi said. That's why I'll tell her the same thing. He peeled off at the end of the corridor, heading toward the gate, without a formal goodbye. Just a slight movement of his hand that was gesture adjacent. Kaito watched him go. Then he went to find Yujito, because he wanted to tell her about the apricot stall, which she apparently didn't know existed and clearly should. The political weather changed on the 20th day. It didn't announce itself. It never did. It just arrived, the way pressure changed before a storm, a shift in the texture of things, the way certain people moved, the quality of the silences in rooms Kaito walked through. He'd felt it for 2 days before he had context for it, and then Darui sat down with him in the late afternoon and told him. Kyumo intercepted a message 2 weeks ago, Darui said. He was using the voice he used when he was being more honest than his position technically required. From one of the other villages. We don't know which, the cipher was good. We broke it yesterday. Kaito waited. The message was about you. Specifically about whether you could be taken. He paused. Extracted. Brought to another location for, study is the word they used. The word landed in the air between them with a specific weight. Which village? Kaito asked. We don't know. The cipher was neutralized before we could trace the origin. It could be Konoha's more aggressive faction, the council, not the Hokage, or it could be Mist, or it could be one of the smaller powers trying to use you as a bargaining chip. Darui looked at him. It wanted me to tell you directly. No intermediaries. That was the right call, Kaito said. He was quiet for a moment. They want to study me. Study, replicate, weaponize, the message wasn't specific. Study is just the version with the least aggressive grammar. Kaito looked at his hands. He had Naruto's hands, he'd always thought that, the shape of them, the broad palms and the slightly too long fingers that were built for gripping things. He'd spent years learning to control what those hands were capable of. He'd spent a lifetime, 2 of them, making sure the control was genuine, not performance. Let me ask you something, he said to Darui. Okay. When something like this happens, when a village decides it wants something it shouldn't have, what's the usual response? Diplomatically. Darui thought about it. Protest through official channels. Intelligence pressure. Economic leverage if available. Occasionally, if the provocation is significant enough, direct action. Direct action, Kaito said. Meaning what? Meaning it takes off the hat and the cloak, Darui said. And has a conversation in a different register. Kaito nodded slowly. He understood. It was the same grammar in any world, diplomacy was the language, and force was the punctuation, and sometimes you needed punctuation more than words. Tell A I'm not concerned, Kaito said. And tell him, he paused. Tell him if anyone tries to take me anywhere I don't want to go, they won't succeed. And the failure will be public. Darui looked at him for a moment. That's a very calm way to say something quite significant. I don't see the point in saying significant things dramatically, Kaito said. They're significant on their own. Darui almost smiled. Not quite. I'll tell him, he said. That night the clouds came in lower than usual, wrapping the upper levels of the city in genuine fog, the kind that made the lanterns blur into soft halos and swallowed sound so that the whole city existed in a muffled, intimate quiet. Kaido was on the training field. He preferred the open air, always, any Saiyan would, working through something that was neither kata nor combat training but the particular meditative exercise of letting his ki move in larger configurations, feeling the outer edge of what he could do and then feeling past it, the way a musician might run scales that existed outside the standard range just to know the instrument's full voice. He was aware he wasn't alone before the footsteps reached him. He was not prepared for it to be a. The rakeage came without his aid, without Darui, without the hat and cloak of office, in training gear, a simple dark top and arm wrappings, looking like what he actually was rather than what his position required him to look like. He stood at the edge of the field and looked at Kaido, and Kaido brought his ki down to resting and looked back. A walked onto the field. "I want to understand something," A said. He was not preambling, he was already in the middle of a thought he'd been having for a while. When you fight. When you actually fight, not a sparring match, not a demonstration. What is it? Kaido thought about the question seriously. What is it for me, or what does it look like? For you. He thought about it. He thought about the valley in the last moments of his first life, Sasuke's eyes and the cold water and the feeling of chakra tearing loose from everything that had held it. He thought about the training plains on planet Vegeta, the sheer physical joy of moving at full capacity against something that could actually challenge him. He thought about what Naruto had been, fundamentally, which was a person who fought because fighting was the only way he knew to reach people who had closed themselves off to every other approach. "It's honest," he said finally. "It's the most honest thing I know how to do. You can perform anything else, conversations, alliances, expressions. When you fight, your real speed, your real instincts, your real priorities, they show. You can't lie with your body the way you can lie with your mouth." He looked at I don't fight because I want to hurt things. I fight because it's the clearest way I know to tell someone the truth. A was quiet for a long moment. Then he settled into a stance. A proper stance, nothing casual, the open stance of someone committing to a full exchange, weight distributed, arms loose, his enormous body moving into its natural fighting geometry with the ease of 10,000 hours. "Tell me the truth," A said. Kaido felt something in his chest that was uncomplicated and clean. "Okay," he said. What followed was not like the demonstration in the market. That had been a display. This was something real. A was genuinely good, genuinely fast, with the specific power of a man who had developed his physical capabilities to an extent that blurred the line between human and something that had simply decided the normal limits were a suggestion. His lightning-natured chakra moved through his strikes with a crackling intensity that made the air taste like a storm. He hit Kaido twice. Clean, direct, full-power strikes that landed with enough force to shift Kaido's footing. Kaido let them land. Not because he couldn't avoid them, he could have, easily, but because he needed to feel what he was working with, needed the tactile information of what contact meant, and because the hits felt good, the specific satisfaction of real impact from someone who had earned their power honestly. Kaido hit back. Once, carefully, maybe a quarter of his real output, and they went back 3 feet, which was something, because A had been planted and nothing planted A. They stopped by mutual agreement, breathing hard, the fog moving around them. A looked at his arm, the one Kaido had hit. He flexed it. He looked at Kaido. "How far above me are you?" he said. Not a question. A calibration. "Far enough that I should never say it," Kaido said honestly. "But not so far that you don't matter. You felt it. Didn't you?" "Yes," A said. He said it without pride and without self-pity, the honest reckoning of a man with a precise relationship to reality. "I felt it." He stood straight. "You could level this city." "I could," Kaido said. "But you won't." "No," Kaido said. "I won't." "Why?" A asked. Kaido looked around at the fog-wrapped city, at the blurred lantern halos and the muffled sounds of a mountain full of people going through their evenings. He thought about a different world, a different city, a different boy sitting on a swing watching people who didn't see him, wanting with everything he had to be worth protecting rather than worth watching. Because it's mine, he said. This place is mine. Not in the way you think, not ownership. But I chose it. I stayed. That means it's mine to protect. He looked at A. That's how I work. A was still for a moment. Then he said, very quietly, my brother told me you were worth keeping around. B's usually right about people, Kaido said. He is, A agreed. It's annoying. He picked up the cloth he'd left at the edge of the field and wiped his hands. Get some sleep. Tomorrow I want you to meet with the council formally. As a participant, not an observer. Kaido blinked. That was fast. I work with what I know, A said. He walked off the field into the fog. I know what I need to know. Kaido watched him go. Then he looked up, at where the sky would be if the fog weren't covering it, at the invisible stars above the invisible clouds, and he breathed in the cold mountain air, and something that had been tightly coiled in his chest since the pod landed, since before that, maybe, since the valley and the cold water and the feeling of everything ending, eased a fraction. Not gone. Not resolved. Just, eased. He stayed on the field for a while longer, feeling the planet beneath his feet, this heavy, patient, living world that didn't know what had arrived on it yet, that was still in the early process of finding out. He thought about the intercepted message. Whether you could be taken. He thought about the full moon, which was 12 days away. He'd been tracking it, a Saiyan habit, the way people in flood plains tracked water levels. Not because he was afraid of it. Because it was a fact about himself, and he had made a point, in both his lives, of being honest about the facts of himself. 12 days. He thought about what Yujito had said, good omens are usually preceded by significant disruption. He thought about how right she was. Then he went inside, and he slept deeply, and the fog held the mountain in its soft grip, and the hidden cloud went on being exactly what it was, alive, complex, and entirely unaware of the specific shape of what was coming. Chapter 4, The Moon Doesn't Ask Permission. The full moon rose on a Thursday. Kaido knew it was coming the way a person knows weather, not thought, just body. He'd felt it building for 3 days, the slow pull of it, like something in his blood being stirred by a long spoon. He'd been through it twice before. The first time on Vegeta, age 6, when he'd woken in the training yards with no memory of the previous 4 hours and a section of the outer wall reduced to rubble. His father had watched him come back to himself and said, with no particular warmth but absolute accuracy, that the great ape was the truest expression of Saiyan power, and the problem was that most Saiyans weren't honest enough with themselves to survive it. Kaido had asked him what honest enough meant. His father had said, it means the animal and the person have to agree. He'd been working on that ever since. He told Yujito on the morning of the 12th day. Not because he needed permission or preparation, he'd made his own preparations, chosen a location, run the calculations on blast radius and structural risk, but because she deserved to know, and because she was the person in the hidden cloud he'd trust most with the information. They were in the library. She was reading something technical about chakra suppression seals, reading it critically, he noticed, with the expression of someone who disagreed with the source but was giving it fair attention. He sat across from her and waited until she looked up. Tonight, he said. There's something you should know about. She set down the scroll. She had a way of giving full attention that was almost physical, the way she oriented toward things, no part of her was elsewhere. Tell me. He told her about the transformation. He kept it practical, what it was, what it looked like, what the risk profile was in terms of collateral damage, what his level of control had historically been and what he thought it was now. He told her about the agreement his father had described, the thing he'd been working on for 6 years. He told her he had chosen a location in the mountain range 3 miles northeast, far enough from the city that structural damage was not a concern at anything below full destructive output, close enough that he could return before dawn. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What do you need from me?" He looked at her. Nothing, technically. Then why are you telling me? Because if something goes wrong, he stopped. If the control fails and the animal takes over completely, I'll need someone who can find me. Someone who's not afraid of what they'll find. He met her eyes. Matatabi could track the key signature. She was quiet again. He watched her process it, not the logistics were simple, but the thing underneath the logistics, the thing he was actually saying, which was "You're the person I trust." "Okay," she said. "You don't have to, Kaito." She said his name the way people said names when they wanted to stop a sentence. "Okay. I'll be there." He nodded. "Northeast Ridge. I'll mark the path." "I know the Northeast Ridge," she said. She picked up her scroll. "I used to go there when the village got loud." She looked at the text without reading it. "It's quiet up there." "Yeah," he said. "I know." He told her that evening. Not asked, told. A was in his office in the middle of reviewing something that was clearly irritating him, which was his normal state with administrative work, and when Kaito came in and explained, it went through 3 expressions in rapid succession: surprise, concern, and then the particular focused intensity that was as close as it got to genuine alarm. "Tonight," A said. "Yes. And you're telling me now?" "I've been here 22 days, Kaito said. I needed to know the landscape before I planned this. I spent the last 3 days identifying the right location and running the risk assessment." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking permission. I'm giving you information." A leaned back in his chair. He looked at Kaito the way he'd looked at him on the training field, that direct, calculating assessment that had stopped being purely threat evaluation somewhere around day 16. "How big?" he said. "The form?" 60 feet, approximately. "Maybe larger, it scales with power level and mine has gone up since landing." Kaito thought about it. The destructive radius at controlled output is significant. At uncontrolled output he paused. "What?" "It's the kind of thing that changes the geography," Kaito said honestly. The office was very quiet. 3 miles northeast, Kaito continued. The ridge passed the second peak. Nothing out there but rock and old-growth pine. "I've walked it twice this week." He held A's gaze. "I'm not going to destroy your mountain." "Your confidence in that is reassuring," A said, in a tone that suggested it was somewhat reassuring and somewhat not. "What happens if the control, Yujito will be there," Kaito said. "She knows the contingency." A's eyes went through something complicated. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then looked at his desk with the expression of someone who had made certain assumptions about their ability to manage situations and was updating those assumptions in real time. "Take Darui," he said. Kaito raised an eyebrow. "Not as backup," A said. "He can't back you up, we both know that. Take him as a witness. Someone with the authority to report back accurately." He looked at Kaito. "I need to know what this is. Not from a sensor reading. From someone who was there." Kaito thought about this. It was a reasonable request. It was also, he recognized, A's way of still being present in a situation he couldn't control, which was its own kind of honesty. "Okay," Kaito said. A nodded. Then, quieter, "Be careful." It was the first time A had said that to him. Kaito stood in the office doorway for a moment, looking back. He didn't say "I will," because that was a promise he might not be able to keep, and he didn't make promises he wasn't certain of. "I'll come back," he said instead. That was a promise he was certain of. Darui met him at the north gate at 2 hours past sunset, wearing his field gear and carrying nothing that suggested he thought he might need it, which Kaito appreciated. He fell into step beside Kaito without preamble, without questions, with the same economy of presence that made him genuinely good company in situations where most people would be filling the silence with noise. Yujito was already ahead of them on the path. She'd gone up an hour earlier, she'd said, to know the ground. When they found her at the ridge, she was sitting on a flat rock at the edge of the tree line, looking out over the valley below, and the moonlight was coming through a gap in the clouds in a way that made the whole northern face of the mountain silver and clean. The moon itself was visible in that gap. Full and enormous, the way full moons looked at altitude, the kind of size that made people in low country think they were seeing something unusual. Kaito looked at it for a moment. Then he turned to Yujito and Darui. "Stay on this side of the tree line," he said. "The rock face behind you will hold. Don't come any closer than you are now unless you hear me speaking, not roaring." "Speaking." He looked at them each in turn. "If I'm speaking, I'm present. If I'm only roaring, give it 20 minutes and then use whatever means you have to get my attention." He looked at Yujito specifically. "You'll know how." She nodded once. He walked out into the open ground of the ridge. It was a wide saddle of rock between two peaks, bare and windswept, with a clear view of the sky in 3 directions. Below on the south face, the hidden cloud was a cluster of lights half-wrapped in cloud. He could see it from here. The lanterns, the patrol routes, the warmth of 10,000 lives going about their night. He stopped in the center of the saddle and looked at the moon. And he let go. Not of control, that was the misconception, the thing most people got wrong about the transformation. It wasn't letting go of control, it was expanding it. The great ape form was not a loss of self. It was the self made enormous, made physical in a way that the smaller body couldn't contain, every emotion and instinct amplified to the point where the body had to become something large enough to hold them. He felt it start in his spine. The key surge was immediate and massive, the kind of output that would have registered on every chakra sensor in the hidden cloud as something catastrophic, a reading so far outside the normal range that the instruments would probably just stop working. He felt his body begin to change, the specific pain of it that was not quite pain but was larger than most other physical sensations, the rapid structural reconfiguration that started in the skeleton and moved outward through muscle and tissue. He kept his mind central. He thought about his name. Kaito. The name his father had given him, chosen for the combination of characters meaning roughly to soar above the sea, a Saiyan king's poetic moment, the kind he pretended he didn't have but clearly did. Kaito. His name, his choice, the thing that distinguished him from the animal that shared his blood. He thought about the ramen. Naruto's ramen. The specific memory of it, the warmth of the bowl and the way the steam smelled and the completely unreasonable amount of satisfaction that a bowl of noodles had given a boy who'd had nobody to eat with. He held both things simultaneously, the expanding enormity of the transformation and the small specific warmth of what it meant to be a person, and he breathed through the gap between them. The transformation completed in about 8 seconds. What stood on the ridge was 67 feet of Saiyan great ape, a form that the elemental nations had no category for, that existed in no bestiary, that had not been seen on this planet in any of its recorded history. The body was massive beyond any scale that local context could calibrate, dark-furred and upright, with golden eyes that caught the moonlight and returned it cold and bright, and the key signature coming off it was the kind of thing that the mountain felt rather than heard, a deep subsonic pressure that moved through rock. But the eyes were not empty. Darui, at the tree line, was very still. He had his hand near a weapon he had already processed would be entirely useless and had decided to keep there anyway because his hands needed something to do. He was watching the form with the expression of a man who had thought he understood the scale of things and was revising that understanding in real time with remarkable composure. Yujito was standing. She'd moved off the rock, and she was watching with her arms loose at her sides, and her eyes had the doubled quality they got when Matatabi was close to the surface, teal and something else, something older and more flickering. She was watching the great ape and the great ape's eyes found her. And didn't attack. They looked at each other across the open rock, the 67-foot Saiyan prince and the 20-year-old Jinchuriki with a cat the size of a mountain living in her chest, and what moved between them was recognition. Not human recognition. Something older. Two vast things acknowledging each other across the specific distance of their respective containment. Matatabi pushed closer to the surface. Yujito felt it, the warmth, the particular feline presence that was usually so careful about how much space it took, and she let it, because it felt right to let it here, in this context, on this moonlit ridge with this enormous creature looking at her. The great ape lowered its head, slightly. Not submission. Acknowledgement. Yujito breathed out. Darui, beside her, said very quietly, is he's there, Yujito said. He's in there. The great ape turned away from them. It looked northeast, over the peaks, at the dark sky beyond the mountain range, at the stars visible between cloud breaks. It raised its head and the sound that came from it was enormous and genuine, not rage, not pain, something more complex than either, the kind of sound that carried all the weight of what was being processed and needed a form large enough to release it. The sound rolled across the ridge and down into the valleys and the hidden cloud heard it, miles away. In the city the lights that had been darkening suddenly paused in their darkening. People who had been asleep were not. The great ape moved. It went north, along the ridge line, stepping with a care that was deliberate, Kaido choosing each placement of those enormous feet, staying on rock rather than moving toward the tree lines, staying on the ridge rather than toward anything below. The ground shook with each step, real seismic movement, the mountain adjusting to the weight of something it had not been built to carry. He was present. That was the extraordinary thing, Darui would write in his report, later, that the extraordinary thing was not the size or the power or the sound, but the presence. The clear, observable intelligence behind the golden eyes. The way it moved with purpose. The way it stopped when it reached the northern end of the ridge and stood at the edge where the mountain fell away into a 2,000-foot drop to the valley below, and looked out at the dark, and was simply still. For 11 minutes the great ape stood at the edge of the mountain and was still. Darui counted. He needed to be doing something. Yujito watched without counting. She stood in the moonlight and felt Matatabi close and warm and unusually quiet, and she watched Kaido, because it was Kaido, she was certain of that now, certain in the same way she was certain of her own heartbeat, stand at the edge of the mountain and hold whatever it was he needed to hold. She thought about what he'd said in the library, 3 weeks ago. You keep asking permission to use it. She'd thought about it a lot since then, the way things lodged in the brain when they were accurate. She'd been thinking about it in the specific context of herself, of Matatabi, of the 20 years of training that had been about managing and containing rather than opening and using, of the difference between a tool and a person. She was a person. The great ape at the edge of the mountain was a person. She was very clear on that. 20 minutes after it had reached the northern edge, the form began to reduce. Kaido had done it twice before, controlled reversion, pulling the transformation back through deliberate ki compression rather than waiting for the moon to pass or the energy to exhaust itself. His father had called it one of the rarest disciplines in Saiyan history. Most Saiyans couldn't manage it at all, the form was too large, the instinct too total, the animal too completely in possession of the body to allow the reversal. He pulled it back like drawing breath. Long and slow and absolutely intentional. The form came down in stages, 60 feet, 40, 20, the fur receding, the ki contracting and the golden eyes fading back to blue, the body reshaping itself through a process that was physically exhausting in the specific way that only large-scale transformation was, the cellular cost of it. He came back to himself on his hands and knees on the bare rock, breathing hard, the cold mountain wind on his skin. He stayed like that for a moment. Letting his body remember its size. Finding the edges of himself. Then he stood up. He was 30 feet from the drop. He looked down at the valley, at the dark of it, at the ribbon of a river far below visible only by moonlight. He looked back at the ridge. Yujito was walking toward him, and Darui was a step behind her, and the moonlight made everything silver and the wind was cold and clean. He was, he realized, absolutely fine. More than fine, the transformation had released something, the way a deep breath released tension, the way a real fight released something that built up in the body over time. He felt lighter. Significantly lighter. In the way of someone who had been carrying something they'd gotten used to not noticing and had now put it down. Yujito reached him. She stopped a few feet away and looked at him with those teal eyes and said nothing for a moment. Then, you okay? Yeah, he said. The city is definitely awake, she said. I know. The sound carried. The sensors are probably still going, Darui said, from behind her. His voice was steady, professional, doing an excellent job of not being the voice of a man who had just watched something that would feature prominently in his dreams for the next several years. A is going to want a debrief. In the morning, Kaito said. He might want it now, Darui said. He can want it now, Kaito said. It's still happening in the morning. Darui looked at him for a moment. Then he made the sound that was his almost laugh. Fair, he said. He looked back toward the city. I'll go ahead. Give him the initial report. He paused, and something in his expression shifted from professional to something quieter. You handled that, he stopped, reconsidering the word. That was something, he said simply, and walked back toward the path. Kaito watched him go, then sat down on the flat rock where Yujito had been earlier. She sat next to him. Not close, a comfortable distance, the distance between two people who had stopped needing to perform casual and were simply being. The moonlight was still coming through the gap in the clouds. It was past midnight now, the moon well past its zenith, and the valley below was dark and wide and the stars in the clear patches of sky were very bright at altitude. Matatabi said something, Yujito said, after a while. What? When you were in the form. She said, she paused, and the pause had the quality of someone quoting something they were still processing. She said the shape of your grief is the same as hers. He was quiet for a moment. She's been alive since before the villages existed, Yujito continued. She's lost things, people, places, forms, lives. She's been sealed and released and sealed again. She looked at the valley. She says she recognizes it. The way it sits in a body. The way someone carries it without letting it carry them. Kaito looked at the stars. Tell her, he said, that I said, yeah. I know. Yujito related internally, and then she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, she says you're going to be alright. Is that a prediction or an opinion? With Matatabi they're usually the same thing. She looked at him sideways. She's been alive a very long time. He thought about that. He thought about how it felt to be told by something ancient and flame-bright that you were going to be alright, and how much he didn't expect it to land the way it did, with weight, with genuine comfort, the way truth landed when it arrived from somewhere that had no reason to lie. Okay, he said quietly. I'll take it. They sat on the mountain in the moonlight for a while longer, the city glowing below them, the wind moving steadily off the peaks, and neither of them needed to fill it with anything. A was awake when they returned. Of course he was. A was the kind of man who didn't sleep while anything was unresolved, which meant he probably averaged 3 hours on a good week. He was in his office, no hat, no cloak, just himself and a lamp and a cup of tea that had gone cold, and when Kaito came through the door he looked at him with the expression of a man conducting a rapid comprehensive inventory. Kaito sat down. I'm fine, he said. The sensor team is reporting readings that their equipment can't display, A said. It just shows maximum. Every gauge pinned. That'll reset, Kaito said. A looked at him. How large? 67 feet, Kaito said. I measured the stride length on the way back. A was quiet for a moment. The sound reached the city. I know. Half the city is awake. I know, Kaito said again. He met A's eyes. I chose the location specifically because it's far enough that the sound was the only thing that reached. Sound I can't suppress in that form. He paused. Everything else I controlled. I looked at him steadily for a long time. The lamp moved slightly in a draft, and the shadows in the room shifted. You had control, he said. The whole time. Yes. Darui's preliminary report said the form showed clear intelligent behavior. That it moved with deliberate care. I looked down at the cold tea, then back up. He said it looked at Yujito and didn't attack. I looked at Yujito and didn't attack, Kaido corrected. I was there the whole time. I nodded slowly. Something in his expression was recalibrating again. He was a man who did this often around Kaido, this constant updating of assumptions, and he was getting faster at it. There will be questions, he said. From the council. From Konoha, when this reaches them. He paused. It will reach them. I know, Kaido said. Let it. I raised an eyebrow. They're going to find out what I am sooner or later, Kaido said. Better they find out on a night when I demonstrated control and intention than on a night when something provoked me into not bothering with either. He held A's gaze. That's the conversation you want to be having with them. Not we tried to contain it. The conversation that says look what it can do and look at what it chose. The silence in the office was very particular. Then A said, what about the intercept? The message about extracting you. What about it? If they were considering that before, they were considering it when they thought I was a 12-year-old with strong ki, Kaido said. Let's see what they consider now that they know what 67 feet of controlled great ape looks like on a mountaintop. He stood. I'm going to sleep. The debrief can be in the morning. I looked up at him. You keep making decisions on my behalf, he said. When they're the right decisions, Kaido said, yes. He walked toward the door. You called me a refugee. I told you not to decide things about me without talking to me first. He glanced back. I'm returning the favor. Tonight was mine. What comes from it, we discussed that together. I was quiet for a long moment. Then, go sleep, he said. Morning debrief. Full council. Sure, Kaido said. He went. He did not go directly to sleep. He went first to the training field, the east face, the high one, the one he'd used since the first week, and sat on the stone and felt the city around him. More awake than usual, the chakra signatures of 10,000 people in states of wakefulness they wouldn't normally be in at this hour. Worried, some of them. Curious, others. Afraid, a few, which he didn't like but understood. He'd made a large sound in the dark from a mountain that people lived next to, and fear was a reasonable response to that from people who didn't know what he was. He'd have to be visible now. Really visible, not just present in the city, but accessible, readable, the kind of thing that people could look at and understand rather than fear because they couldn't categorize it. That was the work the morning would start. The council, then the public-facing side, then the diplomatic communication with Konoha and whoever else was already asking questions. He thought about Kakashi. He thought about the sharp, kind intelligence in that one visible eye, the way he'd eaten an apricot and called it a conversation. Kakashi would process tonight correctly. Kaido was fairly confident of that. He thought less certainly about the source of the intercepted message. Whoever had written whether he could be taken had done so before tonight. They were writing it again now, he was sure, with different arithmetic. Good. He wanted the arithmetic to be different. He wanted the conclusion of that arithmetic to be unambiguous. He heard footsteps behind him, light ones, familiar, and didn't turn around until they stopped beside him. You're not sleeping, Yujito said. Neither are you, he said. She sat down next to him. Closer than she usually sat. Not significantly, a foot of distance rather than two, but perceptibly, and he noticed it the way you noticed weather changing. Matatabi is still talking, she said. What's she saying now? She says, something big is coming. Not tonight. Soon. She looked at the city. She's been saying it for a week but it got louder tonight. Her voice was even. She'd learned the ability to discuss catastrophe in an even voice, the particular gift of people who had lived alongside large, dangerous things long enough to develop a working relationship with dread. She's usually right. What does she think it is? She doesn't know specifically. Just, something old deciding to move. Yujito turned to look at him. Does that mean anything to you? He thought about Frisia. He thought about the kind of power that destroyed planets casually, not even with particular malice, just as the logical consequence of being the kind of thing that didn't have to care about consequences. Maybe, he said. Or it might be something new. He looked at the city. Either way, something big is coming. That's fine. She looked at him. Fine. I'm here, aren't I? He met her eyes. Whatever's coming, it's arriving at a place that I've decided is mine to protect. That changes the math on its end significantly. He said it simply, without drama, the way he said most things that were true. I'm not worried. She held his gaze for a moment. The lamplight from the city below caught the color of her eyes, that strange teal that shifted in different light, and she had the expression she got sometimes, the one that was not quite something and was definitely something, and then she looked back at the city. You know what the village will say tomorrow, she said. When they process tonight. They'll say a lot of things. Some of them will be afraid. Some of them should be, a little, he said. Healthy fear is just respect for scale. I don't mind respect. He paused. I mind being dismissed. Or being treated like a problem to be managed. But respect, he looked at the city, I'll take it. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, softly, when I was 7, the seal was reinforced for the 3rd time. The procedure was, significant. The people who did it talked about it afterward like it was a technical achievement. Not once did anyone, she stopped. He waited. Not once did anyone look at me afterward and say, are you okay? The night was very quiet around them. The wind had dropped. The clouds were building again over the western peaks. Kaito looked at her. Are you okay? He asked. She blinked. Not about the seal, he said. In general. Right now. Are you okay? She was still for a long time. Long enough that the question sat between them and did what real questions did, which was take up honest space. I'm better than I was a month ago, she said finally. She paused. I think I'm okay. Yeah. Good, he said. She looked at him, and he looked at the city, and after a moment she said, very quietly and with the complete honesty of someone who'd run out of reasons not to be honest, I'm glad your pod landed here. He was quiet for a moment. Yeah, he said. Me too. The morning debrief lasted 4 hours and covered everything from sensor data to civic reassurance protocols, and Kaito sat at the council table as a full participant for the first time and answered questions with the same directness he'd given the night before. The council was frightened in the way intelligent people were frightened by things they couldn't categorize, not paralyzed, just recalibrating, and he gave them the information they needed to recalibrate accurately. Samui asked the best questions, as usual. The civilian administrator asked questions about property damage, which there was none of, which seemed to genuinely surprise him. B arrived 40 minutes late, having slept through his alarm, sat down, looked at Kaito, and said, "You absolute legend," loud enough that Darui's professional facade cracked slightly. A ran the room and let Kaito speak when he needed to and cut off tangents with surgical efficiency, and by the end of the 4 hours the council had a working framework for what the transformation was, what its conditions were, what the risk profile looked like under various scenarios. At the end, they looked at the council. "This stays internal until I've handled the diplomatic communications," he said. "No leaks. No second-hand reports." 7 people nodded. "And this village's position," it continued, "is the following." He looked at the table. "The entity," he stopped. Looked at Kaito. Something moved across his face. "Kaito," he corrected, and the word was deliberate, "is under cloud protection. He is not a weapon, not an asset, and not a prisoner. He is a resident of this village who has demonstrated both extraordinary power and extraordinary restraint. He looked up at the room. Anyone who acts contrary to that position answers to me directly. The room was quiet. Kaido looked at the table. He did not let his face do the thing it wanted to do, which was something probably embarrassing. Any questions? A said. There were none. Good, A said. He stood. Darui, draft the communication to Konoha. Kaido will review it before it goes. He walked out. The council filed out behind him. Kaido stayed seated for a moment. B dropped into the chair next to him and leaned over conspiratorially. He called you by name, B said, in a stage whisper. In a formal council meeting. My brother does not do that. I noticed, Kaido said. That means your family, B said, with absolute certainty. In Kyumo terms. That's how it works. Once a calls you by name in a room, he made a gesture that was expansive and apparently conclusive. Kaido looked at him. Is that an actual cultural thing or are you making that up? B's grin was enormous. Why not both, he said. Outside the windows the hidden cloud went about its morning, still a little unsettled, still processing the large sound from the mountain the night before, the residual alertness of 10,000 people who'd woken in the dark to something they hadn't understood. Processing and then settling, the way cities settled when they decided things were okay, a gradual return to rhythm, the market sounds coming up, the children in the courtyard resuming their chalk drawings. Kaido sat at the council table and listened to it settle, and thought about everything that was coming, and was entirely unafraid. Which was, he thought, probably the healthiest thing he'd felt in 2 lifetimes. Chapter 5, After the mountain falls 3 weeks after the full moon, the hidden cloud received an official delegation from Kumogakure's intelligence partners in the Land of Lightning's outer provinces, and hidden inside the delegation, dressed as a trade attaché, was an operative whose real mission had nothing to do with trade. Kaido made him in 40 seconds. Not through any dramatic revelation, no confrontation, no alarm raised. He simply passed the man in the corridor outside the administrative wing, felt the particular quality of his attention, the way his key was pulled tight and still in the specific pattern of someone performing deliberate suppression, and kept walking. He catalogued the face, the build, the direction of travel, the document case under his arm that was slightly too thick for its contents. He went to find Darui. Third man in the delegation, he said. Gray jacket, scar under his left ear. He's not trade. Darui, who had been reviewing supply requisitions with the expression of a man doing penance, set his pen down. What is he? I don't know exactly. But he spent 30 seconds in the corridor outside A's office this morning when there was no reason to be in that corridor, and he's been near the administrative wing twice since the delegation arrived. Kaido sat down. And his suppression is too deliberate. Normal people don't suppress. He's been trained to. Darui looked at him. You can tell the difference between someone suppressing and someone who's just quiet. When they're suppressing they have edges, Kaido said. Like holding something still by force instead of naturally. It has a texture. Darui was quiet for a moment with the expression of someone filing information about Kaido's capabilities into an already full cabinet. I'll have him monitored, he said. Discreetly. Don't let him know he's been made, Kaido said. Let him do his job for now. I want to know who he's reporting to. Darui looked at him. That's an intelligence operation. Yes, Kaido agreed. Are we doing it? Darui picked his pen back up. I'll talk to Samui, he said, which was a yes. The operative, they identified him within 6 hours as a contracted agent connected to a faction within Konoha Civilian Council, not the Hokage, not the active shinobi hierarchy, spent 2 days gathering what information he could and then departed with the delegation. He left with very accurate information about the village's defensive infrastructure, somewhat accurate information about its troop deployments, and carefully curated entirely inaccurate information about Kaido, which Darui had prepared with the particular precision of someone who enjoyed the specific chess of counterintelligence. The package the operative carried told his handlers that Kaido was highly aggressive, difficult to control, and actively straining against the Hidden Cloud's authority. The goal being that anyone planning an extraction would plan for a target that was straining to leave. "You want them to come," A said, when Darui explained. "I want them to make their move," Kaido said, from the window. "If they're going to do it, they're going to do it. I'd rather it happen here, on ground I know, on a timeline I influenced, than somewhere else when I'm not ready." A looked at him. "You're 12. You keep saying that like it changes the math," Kaido said. B. On the couch in A's office, he'd arrived uninvited and nobody had made him leave because nobody ever successfully made B leave anywhere, said, "He's got a point, bro." A looked at his brother. Then back at Kaido. Then at the ceiling. He had a specific relationship with the ceiling of his office, Kaido had noticed. He looked at it when he was conceding things to himself, the way other people looked at the floor. "Fine," he said. They came on a moonless night 14 days later. 7 of them, which Kaido found both flattering and slightly insulting. Flattering because they clearly weren't underestimating him, insulting because whoever had planned this still thought 7 was the answer. They came in over the northwest wall during the shift change in the patrol rotation, which was a genuinely good window, and they moved through the upper administrative district with the competence of people who'd been given accurate floor plans and a clear objective. The objective was Kaido's room. He wasn't in it. He was sitting on the roof of the building adjacent, watching them go through the window, and when the last of the 7 had entered he dropped off the roof and landed in the street with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. "If you're looking for me," he said, conversationally, to the general direction of the window, "I'm out here." A beat of silence. Then 3 of them came back out the window with the rapid fluid movement of high-level operatives recalibrating, through the window, to the wall, down to the street, impressive work, genuinely, and 4 more came around the building's corners from positions they'd held as backup, which meant the floor plan they'd been given was accurate and the tactical plan was solid. 7 shinobi in the street. Kaido standing in the middle of it. Moonless night, the lanterns on this street extinguished, they'd taken care of the lights, he'd noticed, with the particular darkness that came from clouds over a mountain. He could see fine. Better than fine. Saiyan eyes in low light were not remotely comparable to human eyes in low light. He looked at all 7 of them. "Here's how this works," he said. "You can fight me, which will end badly for you, or you can tell me who sent you, which will also probably end badly for them but will at minimum end better for you." He tilted his head. "I'm genuinely offering you the choice. I'm not performing being nice. I'm actually being nice." The leader, a woman, compact and precise, with the specific body language of someone who had been given a mission and was going to complete it regardless, said, "Stand down and come with us." "No," Kaido said pleasantly. She moved. What followed lasted 43 seconds, which Kaido timed internally as a personal benchmark. 7 against 1, 7 being genuinely skilled, coordinated, and committed. The leader had a Kekkei Genkai, a bloodline ability that manifested as a crystalline armor that formed along her arms with the sound of breaking glass, giving her strikes both a structural weapon and a defense. 2 of the others were chakra enhancement specialists, the remaining 4 were varied but high-end. He moved through them the way water moved through a space, not by force but by finding the lines between things, the fractions of seconds between committed moves, the small geometries of bodies in motion that opened and closed with the specific logic of a system that could be read if you were fast enough to read it. He didn't hurt anyone seriously. That was the discipline, the thing that was harder than fighting at full power. Full power was easy. Controlled power was the work. He put each of the 7 on the ground with enough force to demonstrate the gap and enough restraint to leave them functional, and by the end of the 43 seconds they were in various states of dazed and winded and staring up at him from the cobblestones with the particular expression of people whose pre-mission risk assessment had been significantly wrong. He stood in the middle of the street and looked down at all 7 of them. "So," he said. "Who sent you?" The leader's name was Chia. She told him, after approximately 4 minutes of silence that he waited out with complete patience, sitting cross-legged on the street while her team recovered, a contracted operative working through an intermediary. The end client was not known to her directly. The mission was extraction, not harm. She'd been explicitly told minimum force, living target only. "What were you going to do with me?" Kaito asked. "Deliver you to a handoff point," she said. What happened after wasn't in the brief. He believed her. She was a professional, and professionals were usually honest about the limits of their knowledge because they had no attachment to protecting information beyond those limits. "The intermediary," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. "I give you that, I'm finished in this profession." "You came to the hidden cloud and tried to extract the rakeage," he paused, choosing the word, resident. "You're already finished in this profession." He met her eyes. "Give me the intermediary and I'll make sure A knows you cooperated. That's worth something to you even if the professional thing isn't." Another long pause. Her team was watching her. One of them, a young man with a badly bruised shoulder from where Kaito had redirected him into a wall, was watching with the particular expression of someone hoping very hard that the decision being made was the right one. She gave him the name. It was a name Kaito didn't recognize. He catalogued it, filed it, made sure he had it correctly, and then stood up. "Stay here," he said. "Someone will come for you shortly." He went to find Darui. Darui's reaction to the name was interesting, not surprise, exactly, but the quality of someone confirming a suspicion they'd been too careful to say out loud. He took the information to A immediately, and A's reaction was even more interesting, which was to say it was thunderous in a way that was carefully contained, a storm behind glass. "Kyomogakure's Civilian Oversight Board," A said. His voice was very level. "Specifically, the Finance Subcommittee. The ones who've been pushing for expansion of the village's intelligence assets," Darui said. "They've been arguing for 3 years that the village is overdependent on contracted shinobi power and needs." He stopped. "Needs what it can't breed," A said. "In their view." The room was very quiet. Kaito was leaning against the wall, watching A process this. It was not a small thing. An internal faction of the civilian oversight body had contracted a foreign extraction operation targeting a resident of their own village. That was not a diplomatic problem. That was a structural one, the kind that lived inside institutions and was harder to address than any external threat because addressing it required the institution to look at itself honestly. A looked at Kaito. "This is my problem," he said. "My house." "Yes," Kaito agreed. "I'll deal with it." "I know you will." Kaito looked at him. "I'm not asking to be involved. I just want to know it's handled." "It will be handled," A said, with the finality of a door closing. It was. Over the following week, quietly and with the specific efficiency of a man who had spent his career understanding how power actually moved through institutions, A dismantled the Finance Subcommittee's operational authority, restructured the civilian oversight relationship to the Intelligence Division, and had 3 formal conversations with 3 different people that Darui described to Kaito as the kind of conversations that end careers without anyone having to say anything out loud. Kaito asked if any of them had pushed back. Darui said one of them had, briefly. Kaito asked how briefly. Darui said about 15 seconds. A week after the extraction attempt, a formal delegation arrived from Konoha. Not observers, a delegation, with credentials and a clear agenda, requesting a meeting that had been prearranged through the official channels that Kakashi's visit had opened. The Hokage was not present herself, which was expected. A first official meeting at this level didn't typically involve the principals, but her representative was a senior figure from the Hokage's office, and they came with a clear mandate. They wanted to talk about Kaito. The meeting was held in the council chamber, and they ran it with Samui and Darui flanking him, and the Konoha delegation sat across the table with the formal precision of people who had prepared extensively and were now deploying that preparation carefully. Kaito sat at A's left. Not against the wall. Not as an observer. At the table. The Konoha representative, a man in his 50s named Hamura, with silver hair and the careful eyes of someone who had spent decades navigating the specific geography of intervillage politics, looked at Kaido with an expression that was professionally composed over something more complex. The Hokage, Hamura said, wishes to express Konoha's interest in establishing direct communication with. He paused, the pause of someone choosing words that had been prepared but needed to land correctly, with Kaido-san. He's right here, A said. Talk to him. A small recalibration. Hamura turned slightly to address Kaido more directly. The Hokage wishes to understand your intentions and your position in the current geopolitical context. Kaido looked at him. My position is that I live here. In the hidden cloud. By choice. He said it simply. I don't have geopolitical intentions. I have a place I've chosen to be and things I've chosen to protect. If that intersects with geopolitics, then I'll engage with it when it does. Hamura looked at him for a moment. You're 12, he said. Yes, Kaido said. And I'm still right. Something moved at the corner of Samui's mouth. Darui found something on the table extremely interesting. Remained professionally impassive, which was its own kind of commentary. Hamura, to his credit, regrouped smoothly. Konoha's position, he said, is one of cautious openness. We are aware of the events of the previous weeks. The transformation reported from the northeast ridge. The extraction attempt. He paused. We are aware of who contracted the extraction. A's expression didn't change. Then you know it was not a Konoha operation. We know it was not a sanctioned Konoha operation, Hamura said carefully. The civilian council faction responsible has been addressed. By us or by you? A said. A beat. Jointly, Hamura said. Kaido looked between them. There had been a conversation before this meeting, he realized, communications he hadn't been privy to, the kind of back-channel exchange that happened between major powers at a level below formal diplomacy. A and the Hokage, or their intermediaries, talking about the extraction attempt and its origins with the direct language that formal meetings didn't allow. What does Konoha want from this meeting? Kaido asked. Not the formal version. The actual want. Hamura looked at him. The professionalism in his expression shifted slightly, not dropping, exactly, but becoming more honest. The look of a man deciding to speak to the intelligence in front of him rather than the age. The Hokage wants to know, Hamura said, if you are a permanent factor or a temporary one. She wants to know whether you are building something here or passing through. He paused. The answer to that question determines a significant number of other questions. Kaido thought about it. He thought about the view from the northeast ridge in moonlight. He thought about Yujito saying me too in an afternoon office, and B's laugh after their fight in the crater, and Darui's almost smile, and they looking up from his desk and saying come back. Permanent, he said. Hamura absorbed this. Then the Hokage would like to arrange a formal introduction. Tell her she's welcome, Kaido said. Anytime. After the delegation left, after the debrief, after the administrative documentation that Darui produced with the speed and volume of someone who processed stress by writing things down, Kaido went to the training field. He went to work. Not the meditative exercises, not the key compression and expansion drills, something more physical, more total. He'd been feeling the need for it for a few days, the specific restlessness of a body that had been doing politics when it wanted to be doing something real. He worked through kata forms at full speed, not Saiyan forms, which were technically combat forms designed against the specific resistance of gravity-heavy planets, but something he'd been developing since landing that incorporated what he'd learned watching Cloud Shinobi move. The combination was strange and original and felt, he thought, genuinely like his own thing rather than something borrowed from either of his lives. He was an hour into it when he heard footsteps. Not Yujito's, heavier, and a different rhythm. He didn't stop what he was doing. B sat on the stone wall at the field's edge and watched him work. After a few minutes B said, "You're different." From what? Kaido said, not stopping. From when you landed. B watched him move. You were, not guarded, exactly. But knew. Like someone who just moved in and hadn't decided yet if they were going to hang anything on the walls. He paused. Now you're hanging things. Kaido slowed and stopped. He looked at B. Is that a metaphor or are you building to a rap? It can be both, B said, with dignity. It doesn't have to choose. Kaido sat down at the other end of the wall. The training field was late afternoon now, the light long and golden, the shadows from the mountain peaks stretching toward the east. You heard the Konoha meeting, Kaido said. I heard the after part, B said. Darui told me. He looked at Kaido sideways. You said permanent. Yeah. I nearly broke his pen, B said. He didn't. But nearly. He looked out at the field. He doesn't say things like that mean something to him. He never does. But they mean things. He glanced at Kaido. You get that about him, right? I get that about him, Kaido said. B was quiet for a moment. Then, my brother lost people, he said. Before you got here. Not recently, over time. People he cared about who got used up by the village, or by war, or by the job. He doesn't, B stopped, choosing words with an uncharacteristic care that showed how much he meant them. He doesn't let people in the way he let you in. He calls it information management. I call it the wall he put up after our parents died. Kaido looked at the field. I'm not asking you to do anything about it, B said. I'm just telling you that you're in there. Inside the wall. And he wouldn't say it and I'm saying it because someone should. He shrugged, vast and casual. That's all. Kaido was quiet for a long moment. Tell him I know, he said. B smiled. He'll hate that. I know, Kaido said. Tell him anyway. B laughed his enormous laugh and it rang off the stone walls of the field and up into the afternoon sky and Kaido watched it go and thought about walls, about the specific architecture of the ones people built and what it meant to be trusted through one, and how that trust was one of the few things in any world that couldn't be taken or extracted or strategized around. It was just given, or it wasn't, and when it was given it was the most real thing going. Yujito found him as the sun went down. She brought food. She'd started doing this, appearing at the end of his training sessions with something from the market below, and she never announced it as anything other than practical. She'd been going that direction anyway, the stall was right there. He'd stopped pointing out the obvious and started just accepting the food and being glad about it. Tonight she had the apricots from the third stall and something wrapped in rice paper that turned out to be grilled fish with a sharp vinegar sauce that was better than it had any right to be given how simple it looked. They sat on the wall where B had been and ate as the city's lights came on one by one below them, the mountain going from gold to amber to the deep blue of dusk. The Konoha delegation was interesting, she said. You heard. Same building, she said. Same walls. Right. He ate an apricot. What did you think? She considered it, which was something he liked about her. She actually considered things when asked. She didn't fire the first available response. I think Konoha's going to be a problem, she said. Not immediately. But their civilian council has the kind of ambition that doesn't learn lessons the first time. The faction that sent the extraction team got their hands slapped. They'll wait and try something smarter. I know, he said. And the other villages are watching. Mist sent a message 2 days ago, informal, through a trading house, but Ace says it's real. They want a meeting. I know that too. She looked at him. You're not worried. I'm aware, he said. Those are different things. She made a sound that was dry acknowledgement. She ate her fish and looked at the city. After a moment, the Two Tails is still saying something big is coming. She's been saying that for a month. She's more specific now. Yujito's voice was careful, the voice of someone relaying information they're still weighing. She says something that was asleep is waking up. Not a person. A system. An old system that this world built and forgot it built. She paused. She says it has eyes on you specifically. Kaito turned to look at her. Why me specifically? Because you're new, Yujito said. Because you arrived from outside the system and you don't fit into it, and things that are outside systems, old things, particularly, find that interesting. She met his eyes. She says it isn't hostile, exactly. More like, curious. The way something very large is curious about something it doesn't recognize. He thought about that. He thought about the specific shape of something old and large, curious about something it doesn't recognize, and what that meant in the context of this world structure, the tailed beasts, the chakra network, the deep geological fact of a planet that had been built differently from Vegeta, that had its own old architecture running underneath everything people had built on top of it. All right, he said. All right, she repeated. When it shows up, I'll deal with it, he said. That's all there is to it. She looked at him for a moment with those teal eyes in the blue dusk light. You actually believe that, she said. It's not performance. I've been performing exactly 0 things since I landed here, he said. You know that. I know, she said, quietly. That's what I mean. The city was fully lit now below them, the lanterns and the torches and the warm interior lights of 10,000 people settling into their evenings, and the clouds above were the deep color of bruised fruit, and somewhere in the lower market someone was playing something on an instrument he didn't have a name for yet, a low warm sound that traveled up the mountain face and arrived softened and strange. He'd learned a lot in the past 6 weeks. He'd learned the layout of the hidden cloud down to its alleyways. He'd learned the political architecture of the elemental nations well enough to think usefully about it. He'd learned what chakra felt like from the outside, the specific warm electric quality of it in people who used it well, which was different from ki in ways he was still mapping. He'd learned that be communicated almost exclusively in rap verses, but that the verses were almost always accurate, which was actually an impressive discipline. He'd learned that Darui's almost smile was the most honest expression in the village because it was the one he couldn't fully control. He'd learned that A's sternness was not coldness, it was the specific discipline of a man who cared too much and had learned to express it through protection rather than words. He'd learned that Yujito said the most important things quietly, and that the quiet was not smallness but precision. He thought about what Matatabi had said, the thing that was waking up, the old system with eyes on him. He thought about the intercepted message and the extraction team and Konoha's civilian council with its persistent ambition. He thought about Mist wanting a meeting and the other villages recalibrating and the whole elemental nations doing what the hidden cloud had done that first day in the market, clearing the square, going quiet, watching with that held-breath attention. He was not afraid of any of it. He was, if he was being honest with himself, and he had made a policy of being honest with himself, it was the policy that had kept him functional through 2 worlds worth of loss, he was interested. Genuinely, deeply interested in what came next. The elemental nations were complicated and old and full of structures and systems and people doing the same things people everywhere did, which was mostly trying to survive and occasionally trying to be worth something, and he had landed in the middle of it with 2 lifetimes of being the kind of person who ran toward complications rather than away from them. Naruto Uzumaki had never met a problem he couldn't solve by being too stubborn to accept its permanence. Kaito, Prince of the Saiyans, had never met a scale he was afraid of. Between those 2 things there was not much in this world that could stop him. Hey, Yujito said. Yeah. That thing you said. On the ridge. She wasn't looking at him. After the transformation. About things you choose being yours to protect. Yeah. I've been thinking about it. She was quiet for a moment. Does that, she stopped. Started again. Does it work the other way? He looked at her. She was still looking at the city, her jaw set in the particular way it got when she was being brave about something. Does what work the other way, he said, knowing. If you choose something, she paused. Does the thing you choose also get to have chosen? He was quiet for a long moment. Yes, he said. That's how it works. She looked at him then. Her expression was doing several things simultaneously in the specific way that expressions did when a person had been very careful for a very long time and was now deciding to stop being quite so careful. She looked at him with those teal eyes in the last of the dusk light, and he looked back, and the space between them was the honest kind of space, the kind that didn't need to be filled with anything. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Below them, the hidden cloud went on being alive and complicated, and there's the music from the lower market still rising up the mountain face, and the first stars appeared in the gaps between the clouds, and the night settled in around the mountain the way nights did here, completely, wrapping the whole city in its cold dark with the specific intimacy of altitude. Kaito looked at the stars. Somewhere up there was the direction of a planet that no longer existed, the grave of a people who had been his people, a history that was his history, that he carried in his blood and his instincts and the particular shape of his grief. He carried it honestly. He did not pretend it wasn't there, and he did not let it be all he was. He was also the boy who had wanted ramen and friendship and to be seen. He was also the prince who had watched his world go bright. He was also the person sitting on a wall on a mountain in a city he had chosen, next to someone who had chosen back, with a world full of complicated things ahead of him that he was entirely prepared to face. He was 12 years old. He had been 12 years old for exactly 6 weeks in this world. He had, for the first time in 2 lifetimes, the specific feeling of being exactly where he was supposed to be, not because fate had put him there, but because he had looked at it and said yes, this and stayed. That was enough. That was, honestly, more than enough. He ate the last apricot and looked at the stars and the city lights and the face of the person next to him, and the hidden cloud breathed around him in its old stone way, and whatever was coming, the waking thing, the watching world, the villages that would have to reckon with what he was, it was coming towards someone who was ready. More than ready. Waiting. 200 miles south, in a mountain pass that the hidden cloud's patrol routes had missed for 6 months, something that had been dormant for a very long time opened one eye. It had felt the transformation on the ridge. It had felt the key, vast and strange and completely outside the architecture of everything that had been built on this planet. It had spent 3 weeks examining the feeling from a distance, the way you examine something through the specific patience of deep time, without urgency, without agenda. It had reached a conclusion. The conclusion was that whatever had fallen from the sky was interesting, and interesting things in this world had a way of becoming important, and important things had a way of finding each other. It closed its eye again. And waited.